Hello there, and welcome to Just About Earth, where curiosity gets cozy and science takes the scenic route to wonder. Tonight's story drifts quietly into the coldest corners of the planet, where wind carves white deserts and the ground has not seen sunlight in thousands of years. It's a place that feels timeless, untouched, and impossibly still. Yet, what if that silence isn't emptiness at all? What if, beneath the endless frost, there lies a secret older than history itself? A secret carefully hidden by those who came long before us. A civilization that rose, flourished, and chose to bury its knowledge beneath the ice, leaving behind not ruins or monuments, but whispers waiting to be heard again. Before we begin this frozen journey, I'd love to know something simple. Where are you listening from tonight? Somewhere warm, maybe, where the air hums with life. Or perhaps the night is cool and quiet where you are. A good setting for stories that unfold slowly. If you find this voyage soothing, if you enjoy exploring the edges of possibility in a calm, curious way, I'd be ever so grateful if you gave this video a like or subscribed. It helps this little corner of calm reach others who might need it. Now let's settle in, slow our thoughts, and step carefully onto the ice. Because in the hush of the poles, where the planet keeps its oldest memories, there might just be traces of something that once called itself the first. If you could stand at the centre of Antarctica, you'd see nothing but white in every direction. The air would sting your face like tiny needles, and even your breath would sound too loud. It's hard to imagine anything alive, let alone anything ancient, buried beneath that vast plain of frozen water. And yet, the ice itself is alive in its own slow way. It moves, it flows, it groans with the shifting weight of time. Layers of snow compact into ice, trapping air bubbles, dust, and the faint chemical fingerprints of distant centuries. When scientists drill ice cores, they aren't just sampling frozen water. They're reading a record that reaches back almost 1 million years, page after page of Earth's climate, atmosphere, and even its volcanic moods. Each layer a year, each air bubble a whisper. Imagine, then, what else might be sealed inside. Not just the story of weather and carbon, but something made, something shaped by hands that no longer exist. It's easy to dismiss such thoughts as fantasy, and in most cases they are. Archaeology, after all, works in rock and soil, not ice. But every so often, discoveries in the cold remind us that nature can be an excellent archivist. In the Siberian permafrost, a fold from 40,000 years ago was found almost perfectly preserved, its fur, muscles, and even internal organs intact. In the glaciers of the Andes, frozen bodies of Inca children still wear their ceremonial garments. Ice is both destroyer and guardian. It erases landscapes but protects what it buries. So if one were to hide something meant to last, ice would be a tempting choice. It resists decay. It holds secrets without question. A civilization aware of its own end, perhaps facing a catastrophe it could not prevent, might have turned to the cold as its final vault. Not for comfort, but for permanence. There's a strange logic to that thought. If you wanted to outlive fire, flood, or conquest, you would bury your knowledge where no one could reach it. At least not for a very long time. And maybe that's exactly what they did. When we think of the first civilizations, we usually picture the warm cradles of the world. Mesopotamia with its twin rivers, the Nile Valley shimmering under the sun, or the Indus Basin dotted with clay brick cities. But our planet is far older than written history, and not all of it has been kind to memory. Beneath the ice, the land tells a different story. Satellite surveys of Antarctica have revealed buried mountain ranges, ancient river systems, and vast plateaus hidden under miles of frozen weight. One of these, the Gamburtsev Mountains, lies entirely buried beneath more than 2 miles of ice. Scientists only discovered it in the 1950s using seismic equipment, and to this day no human eye has seen it directly. It's as large as the Alps, yet invisible. A whole world erased by a long winter. The ice sheet that hides it is thought to be around 34 million years old, far beyond the reach of human history. Still, the land underneath wasn't always frozen. Geological records suggest that before the ice took over, Antarctica was green and temperate, home to forests and rivers. Fossilized pollen, plant matter, and even ancient lake beds tell a story of a world that once looked more like modern New Zealand than a frozen desert. If that's true, then long ago, before the continent drifted into its polar position, it could have supported complex life, and perhaps, just perhaps, something that could think, build, and remember. Of course, this is where speculation begins to walk a delicate line. There's no archaeological evidence for human civilization beneath Antarctic ice, and mainstream science remains firm on that point. The earliest known humans, anatomically speaking, emerged only a few 100,000 years ago, long after the continent was sealed in ice. But the idea of lost civilizations has a way of persisting, not because it defies reason, but because it touches something deeper in us. The feeling that there's more to the story, that we've forgotten something essential about our past. Many cultures have myths that seem to hint at forgotten ages. The Greeks spoke of a golden age before a flood swept the world clean. Hindu texts describe cycles of civilization rising and falling over spans so long they stretch the imagination. Even Plato's tale of Atlantis, often dismissed as allegory, has lingered for millennia, perhaps because it echoes the oldest human instinct, the sense that our story did not begin with us. If there was once a civilization older than history, its traces would be almost impossible to find. Time erases almost everything. Erosion, tectonics, the endless churn of the planet's surface, they all conspire to hide what came before. Only ice stands apart, quietly preserving. And so, we wonder, if such a civilization existed, and if it foresaw its own end, would it have left a message? Something not carved in stone or written on fragile scrolls, but encoded in a way that could endure? Maybe not a building or a machine, but a pattern. Something buried so deeply that only a species capable of science could rediscover it. There's a curious parallel here with how we, in our own time, think about preserving knowledge for the far future. Modern scientists have discussed ways to leave messages for civilizations millions of years from now. Warnings about nuclear waste, records of humanity etched into metal discs, even DNA libraries stored in permafrost. We too choose the cold as our vault. Under the Greenland ice sheet, researchers have found traces of an ancient tundra, complete with fossilized plants. That discovery proved that ice could indeed preserve entire ecosystems for millions of years. And when they drilled deep into Lake Vostok, a vast body of water sealed under more than 3 kilometers of Antarctic ice, they found microbial life that had been isolated for hundreds of thousands of years. The lake had never seen the open air, yet it still whispered signs of survival. If microbes can persist in darkness and pressure, could artifacts, objects of intention, endure as well? We simply don't know. For decades, geophysicists have been mapping the bedrock beneath Antarctica using radar and satellite imaging. The data reveals shapes and ridges that sometimes look uncannily geometric. Most are natural, of course. Ice flows can carve angles and lines that trick the eye. But every so often, a pattern appears that makes people pause. It's not that there's proof of architecture, only that nature sometimes builds with a precision that invites imagination. And imagination, especially when mixed with curiosity, is how every discovery begins. The poles have always stirred something in the human mind. They are the edges of our world, where maps end and myth begins. Explorers who first reached them often describe the eerie quiet, the way the compass faltered, the strange colours in the sky. It's not hard to see how legends could grow in such places. In some stories, the poles are gateways, entrances to hidden realms or ancient cities preserved in crystal cold. Others imagine them as the resting places of gods or advanced beings who once shaped the world and then retreated beneath it. These tales sound fantastic, but they all share a single image: knowledge sleeping under ice, waiting for the world to be ready again. What makes this idea especially haunting today is how the ice itself is changing. The polar regions are warming faster than anywhere else on Earth. Glaciers retreat, meltwater streams cut through old ice, and the ground beneath is beginning to emerge after being buried for millennia. In Greenland, melt reveals dark patches of soil and even traces of plant life. In Siberia, thawing permafrost uncovers long-dead animals and ancient pollen. If there ever was something hidden deliberately beneath the ice, this would be the moment it began to stir again. Of course, there's a difference between curiosity and belief. Scientists tread carefully, distinguishing evidence from imagination. But in the quiet of night, it's tempting to blur the line just for a while, to ask not whether it's true, but whether it could be. Could the story of humanity have deeper roots than we think? Could there have been a civilization advanced enough to predict an extinction event, to prepare for it, and to hide its essence somewhere safe? Not a civilization like ours, perhaps. Maybe not even human in the way we define it, but intelligent, self-aware, capable of leaving behind a legacy in the only form the planet could preserve. There's something strangely comforting about that possibility. If knowledge was hidden beneath the ice, it means that intelligence, wherever it arises, tries to endure. It reaches forward, even when the light is fading. And maybe that's what connects us to those imagined predecessors, the urge to be remembered, to send something of ourselves into the future, no matter how uncertain it might be. The ice becomes more than a symbol then. It's a boundary between what we know and what we might yet discover. Every year, new technologies allow us to peer a little deeper. Satellite interferometry, radar tomography, magnetic surveys. We can now detect features under kilometres of ice without drilling a single hole. The maps they produce look almost like X-rays of the planet, revealing ghost landscapes frozen in place. Valleys, lakes, mountain ranges. Some of them have been sealed away since before our species existed. And when we look at them, we can't help but feel a quiet unease, as though we're glimpsing memories that aren't ours. Imagine standing at one of those sites as the sun circles low over the horizon, never setting, the wind carving faint patterns across the snow. Beneath your feet, 2 miles down, lies a world that hasn't breathed in millions of years. Perhaps there are remnants of forests, sediments from ancient lakes, or something entirely unfamiliar. Something made. Something meant to be found. We don't yet have the tools to reach it safely without melting what we seek, but we're getting closer. And maybe that's part of the story. Knowledge hidden not to be forgotten, but to be revealed only when its seekers were capable of understanding it. In a way, that's what science does. It unfreezes truths one layer at a time, cautious not to damage what it touches. Every discovery under ice, every new core sample, every radar image, is like a sentence emerging from a long-lost language. We read it slowly, knowing that one misplaced interpretation could change the meaning entirely. So we move carefully, listening for those whispers beneath the frost, not sure yet whether they belong to nature or to something that once called itself civilization. But the act of listening itself says something about us. It says we believe that the past still has something to teach, even when it's buried beyond reach. As the cold wind settles and the hum of the earth fades into the background, the idea begins to feel less like a fantasy and more like an unfinished conversation. The ice holds its silence, and we, in our restless curiosity, keep asking questions into that silence. Somewhere between those two, the stillness of the frozen world and the movement of the human mind, lies the beginning of the next part of our story. The silence of ice stretches into memory, and memory becomes something older than story. Before the first names were carved into stone, before the first fires reflected in human eyes, there were already whispers on the wind about people who came before. Not ancestors, not myths exactly, but something caught between the two. civilizations that walk the earth before history began writing itself. The evidence for them is faint, almost imaginary, yet it lingers like an echo through cultures separated by oceans and centuries. Perhaps that's what echoes are, fragments of sound that refuse to die, reminders that something once spoke, even if we no longer understand the language. If we think about what history really means, it isn't time itself, but the record of it. History begins when memory becomes external, when someone decides that what they know must be carved, painted, or preserved. Everything before that moment, every generation that lived without leaving such marks, belongs to the silence before history. Archaeologists have pieced together traces of that silence, scattered tools, bones, and burnt seeds, but those are more like footprints than voices. They tell us that someone passed through, but not what they believed, built, or dreamed. So much of early humanity remains invisible, and invisibility invites imagination. It leaves a gap wide enough for possibility. In the caves of Europe, drawings of animals older than any city still dance across the walls. Hands pressed in pigment mark their creator's presence, not with names, but with existence itself. These weren't random decorations, they were stories, maybe rituals, maybe records of survival. If humans 30 or 40,000 years ago could produce art so deliberate, how far might that ability stretch backward into the unknown? And if the surface of the world keeps changing, swallowing coastlines, lifting mountains, freezing seas, how much of that unknown has simply been erased? The continents we know now are only one version of Earth's skin. Oceans have risen and fallen many times, covering entire landscapes that once might have supported life, perhaps even society. Modern science admits that we don't have the full picture. Sea levels during the last glacial maximum were over 100 metres lower than today. Entire regions now underwater were once dry plains. Between what is now Europe and Britain lay Doggerland, a wide stretch of fertile ground that connected them, home to rivers, forests, and people who hunted and fished there until the sea claimed it. Off the coasts of India, Japan, and the Caribbean, sonar has revealed patterns of stone that could be natural, but also strangely ordered. Scientists debate, divers explore, and legends resurface. Tales of drowned cities, sunken temples, and civilizations swallowed by the tides. It's hard not to wonder whether those stories began as memories of real places lost to the rising seas when the ice last melted. If such civilizations existed, they would have lived at the mercy of a changing planet. The end of the Ice Age was violent in geological terms: floods, quakes, eruptions, climate swings. To survive, a culture might adapt, move, or vanish entirely. But what if some foresaw the end and acted not with panic but with intention? What if they sought to protect what they knew, not their lives, but their knowledge? Ice, as we've seen, would be an ideal hiding place. The cold does not care who put something there, it only preserves, and perhaps the memory of those who hid something beneath it lived on, distorted, retold as myth. Many ancient traditions speak of teachers who came from far away, from lands of light, from across the seas or from beneath them. In Sumerian myth, there's the figure of Oannes, who rose from the water to teach humans writing and science. The Maya told of beings who came from the east after a great flood, bearing calendars and wisdom. The Egyptians spoke of Thoth, the keeper of knowledge, said to have come from a lost island. These stories are scattered and symbolic, but the pattern repeats: knowledge that survives disaster, carried or hidden by those who refuse to let it die. Perhaps what these myths remember isn't a single person or race, but the echo of that idea, the will to preserve in the face of ending. Archaeologists tend to see such myths as allegory, reflections of natural events or social changes, and often they are. Flood myths, for example, appear almost everywhere, from Mesopotamia to the Pacific Islands. They could easily be memories of local floods amplified into cosmic ones. Yet the persistence of the theme, a world washed clean, survivors emerging with fragments of knowledge, suggests something deeper, a collective memory of a real global transformation at the end of the last ice age, when rising seas reshaped coastlines and erased entire habitats. For the people living then, it must have felt like the end of everything. Maybe some of them tried to make sure it wasn't. The archaeological record is thin because time is merciless. Organic material rots, metal corrodes, stone weathers, and ice grinds all things into dust. A structure built 12,000 years ago would be nearly impossible to find intact unless it was preserved under exceptional conditions. Yet even in that obscurity, a few sites challenge the linear timeline we've built. Göbekli Tepe in southeastern Turkey, for instance, dates to around 11,000 years ago, long before agriculture, cities or writing were supposed to exist. Its towering stone pillars are carved with animals and abstract symbols, arranged in circles that suggest planning, cooperation, and a complex worldview. It doesn't fit neatly into the model of nomadic hunter-gatherers. Whoever built it had organisation and purpose far beyond what we assumed possible for that time. Göbekli Tepe doesn't prove the existence of a forgotten civilization, but it does show that sophisticated architecture and symbolic thought existed much earlier than we thought. It pushes the boundary of what first civilization means, and if one site survived, buried, and protected by chance, how many more might have been lost completely, crushed under ice, drowned under seas, or consumed by time? The story we tell about ourselves is always limited by what we've found, not necessarily by what was. There's a peculiar humility in that realization. We live surrounded by technology, convinced of our advancement, yet we might be children playing with fragments of an older inheritance. Even in fields like astronomy, we often rediscover ideas known in different form to ancient scholars. Cycles of the stars, alignments of planets, the geometry of the heavens. All these were charted with astonishing accuracy long before telescopes. The builders of Stonehenge, Nabta Playa, or the great observatories of Mesoamerica tracked celestial events with precision that still puzzles researchers. Some of their alignments are so exact that they suggest generations of careful observation, perhaps built on records older than the monuments themselves. When knowledge is lost, it doesn't vanish instantly. It lingers in ritual, in symbol, in art. A civilization's memory can become myth, and myth can carry truth disguised as story. If the first civilization hid its knowledge, maybe it didn't mean only physical hiding, not just sealed beneath ice, but encoded in stories, numbers, and symbols meant to outlast their creators. We do something similar. We embed warnings in art, ideals in myths, and data in forms that might survive catastrophe. Perhaps those before us did the same, leaving behind patterns we've yet to recognize. Imagine a society that understood the cycles of climate and catastrophe, that realized the ice would one day return. They might not have had machines as we do, but they could have had insight, a scientific or spiritual awareness of how the earth breathes through time. Knowing that, they might have chosen to align their knowledge with the natural world, trusting that the planet itself would guard it. They could have encoded their understanding in geometry, in the proportions of sacred structures, in myths describing floods and rebirths. Those who came after, forgetting the origin, might have kept the rituals while losing the reason, turning practical knowledge into religion. It's a pattern that history repeats more than once. As humans spread across the world, they carried fragments of these old ideas with them. The concept of sacred mountains, axis mundi connecting heaven and earth, appears in nearly every culture. In some myths, these peaks are physical places. In others, symbolic centres of knowledge. The Himalayas, Mount Meru, Olympus, the Andes, each a different face of the same memory. Perhaps one of those ancient centres once stood closer to the poles, later buried under the march of glaciers. It's speculation, but speculation is how we reach beyond the visible. Science approaches these questions carefully, gathering data from genetics, geology, and climatology. Genetic evidence shows that all modern humans share common ancestors who lived in Africa roughly 200,000 years ago. Yet even within that framework, there are hints of complexity. Population bottlenecks, migrations, and possible interbreeding with other hominins we're only beginning to identify. The discovery of Denisovans, for instance, came from a single finger bone found in a Siberian cave. That fragment changed how we see our own species' past. If one bone can rewrite prehistory, imagine what an entire site beneath ice might do. Glaciologists sometimes talk about the ice not just as a record of climate, but as a time machine. Each layer traps ancient DNA, pollen, soot, and microorganisms. By studying them, scientists reconstruct environments long vanished. In some layers, they find unexpected materials, volcanic ash from distant eruptions, meteorite dust, traces of cosmic events. The ice connects everything, recording not just Earth's history, but the history of the cosmos that touches it. If something artificial were hidden there, an alloy, a pattern of isotopes, a buried signal, it might take decades to notice among the natural noise. Yet the possibility lingers that one day a core sample could reveal something that doesn't belong. For now, the evidence remains elusive, but the questions themselves are valuable. They push science to look deeper, to refine methods, to test assumptions. Every time we imagine a lost civilization, we also challenge our own. We remind ourselves that progress isn't guaranteed, that knowledge can vanish, and that survival depends not only on intelligence but on humility. Civilizations, like individuals, are temporary. The ice may outlast them all. In the stillness of night, when we think about those who might have come before, it's not just curiosity, it's recognition. We see in them the same fears and hopes that drive us, the wish to be remembered, the fear of being forgotten, the quiet desire to protect something meaningful against time. Whether they were real or not, their imagined presence beneath the ice mirrors our own longing for continuity. If they did exist, maybe they weren't gods or aliens or superhumans, but people much like us, looking at the changing sky and wondering how to save a fragment of their world. Perhaps that's why the idea of hidden knowledge resonates so deeply. It speaks to something universal, the sense that wisdom belongs not to one era, but to the earth itself, circulating, freezing, thawing, and reappearing when the world is ready. Maybe the ice is less a tomb than a gestation, holding truths in suspension until curiosity warms enough to release them. And so the story continues quietly, through excavation, through myth, through speculation wrapped in data. We listen to echoes, not knowing if they're voices or just the wind moving through old layers of ice. But we listen anyway, because that's what we do. Beneath the frost, in the silence before history, there's always the chance that something familiar waits to be found again. Not proof of gods or giants, but of ourselves, reaching backward through time to touch a hand that once reached forward. The wind moves across the polar plateau, sculpting ridges and ripples, each one temporary yet precise. It's strange to think that even now, as the ice shifts, the earth beneath is alive with motion. Rivers still flow under the glaciers, slow but constant. They carve new paths through ancient stone, reshaping a landscape that no one can see. Somewhere in that hidden world, memory sleeps, patient and indifferent. The first civilization, if it ever existed, may have left no monuments at all. Only the idea that knowledge endures best when it becomes part of the planet itself. And as the ice thickens and thins through the ages, carrying our questions forward, we begin to realize that history is less about who came first and more about who keeps listening. The echo before history never truly ends. It simply waits for another voice to answer. The world beneath the ice moves so slowly that it almost feels still. Yet stillness, as scientists know, is an illusion. Every glacier on Earth is in motion. Every frozen sheet creeps, fractures, and reforms in its own quiet rhythm. If you could watch it from above in fast motion, You would see rivers of ice flowing like liquid stone, surging down invisible valleys, swallowing everything in their path. This slow, relentless movement is not chaos but memory. Ice remembers. It carries the story of the world in its body, layering time into itself year after year, century after century. Each snowfall that compacts into the glacier becomes a page in that story, a record of air and dust and life. The deeper you go, the older the pages become, until the bottom layers press against time so ancient they predate language itself. It's strange to think that the air we breathe has ghosts trapped in it. Bubbles of atmosphere sealed thousands of years ago, preserved as if waiting to speak again. Scientists drill deep into the polar ice to collect these air samples, and when they release them into instruments, they're literally listening to the breath of the ancient Earth. From those bubbles, we've learned how carbon and oxygen changed across millennia, how volcanic eruptions darkened skies long before human eyes watched the sunsets. In some layers, there are even traces of distant supernova, cosmic dust that fell across the planet like silent rain. The ice does not forget. It captures everything that touches it, no matter how fleeting. That quality, the ability to store time, makes ice a kind of accidental historian. But unlike human historians, it doesn't interpret or judge, it simply preserves. If there were once artifacts, messages, or even traces of a lost civilization sealed within it, they would lie there undisturbed, frozen not just in temperature but in meaning. Over time, ice compresses, its crystals shifting and merging, but small pockets remain untouched. Miniature museums of the past. A bone fragment, a seed, a tool, even a fragment of fabric could survive for tens of thousands of years if entombed quickly enough. The Arctic permafrost has already yielded mummified mammoths with intact muscles and stomach contents, wolves with fur still glistening, and ancient pollen that still glows green under microscopes. It's not impossible to imagine that somewhere deeper, something older still waits. When scientists extracted ice cores from central Antarctica, they found layers reaching back 800,000 years. That's longer than our species has existed. To study such cores is to look into a time when our ancestors were still learning to tame fire. The air bubbles in those cores tell a story of Earth's breathing, how it inhaled and exhaled through ages of heat and cold. They reveal that the planet's climate has always been cyclical, that ice ages come and go like tides. Each glacial period wipes the slate clean, grinding mountains, burying valleys and resetting ecosystems. What was once forest becomes plain, what was once sea becomes land, and what was once a thriving region becomes a desert of snow. If we accept that the ice acts as a natural archivist, then perhaps it also holds the only complete record of everything that has ever lived on this planet, including things that might not have left fossils or artifacts in the usual sense. There are microscopic traces, fragments of DNA, viral particles, bacterial communities that once thrived in long-vanished environments. Some scientists have revived bacteria from permafrost tens of thousands of years old. They awaken briefly, reproduce, and then die again, as if recalling a world they no longer belong to. Ice not only preserves memory, it occasionally revives it. The concept of memory stored in frozen matter isn't limited to biology. In physics, ice demonstrates a kind of crystalline persistence, molecules arranged in ordered lattices that resist change until enough energy arrives to disrupt them. The same pattern exists in information storage: order, stability, and release. It's almost poetic how the natural structure of ice mirrors the structure of data, both systems built to capture and retain patterns. If a civilization wanted to store knowledge across geological timescales, they might have noticed this too. The cold provides stability, structure provides endurance. Combine the two and you have a medium capable of surviving catastrophe. Modern humans are beginning to use ice that way, though for more practical reasons. The Svalbard Global Seed Vault, built deep into a mountain in the Arctic Circle, uses permafrost to store seeds from around the world. It's designed to protect biodiversity against war, disaster, or simple neglect. Inside, it's perpetually cold, dark, and quiet, conditions chosen precisely because they halt decay. In that vault lie potential beginnings, not just endings. One could imagine an earlier civilization making a similar choice, though for different reasons. Perhaps not to preserve seeds, but to preserve themselves through memory, through record, through instruction. If they saw disaster approaching, maybe their final act was not to build monuments, but to make archives. We often assume that progress is a straight line, moving ever forward from simplicity to complexity. But natural history suggests otherwise. Extinction and rebirth shape every era. Forests burn and regrow, species vanish and return in altered form, and knowledge itself may follow the same pattern. Ice becomes the mechanism through which that cycle is recorded. Each freeze traps the remnants of what came before, and each thaw releases them into the world again. The melting glaciers of today are not just geological events, they're revelations. They release ancient air, ancient microbes, ancient dust, and possibly one day, ancient evidence of thought. To see ice as memory is to understand time differently. We tend to think of time as a flow, moments passing, vanishing, replaced by the next. But in the frozen world, time doesn't flow. It stacks. It accumulates in layers, each one holding the previous intact beneath it. The present literally sits on top of the past. To reach what came before, we dig down instead of back. And that means that the deeper we drill, the closer we come to the origins of everything we know. In Greenland, scientists discovered something remarkable. When they drilled through more than a mile of ice, they reached the rock beneath and found not barren stone but a layer of ancient soil, frozen, intact, and filled with the remains of plants. It was a glimpse of a time when Greenland was not green by name alone. It was lush, temperate, alive. This discovery confirmed that ice can preserve entire ecosystems, not just fragments, but wholes. The implications are enormous. If an ecosystem can survive in memory form for millions of years, then so can anything built within it. Consider what that means for the theory that knowledge might be hidden beneath the ice. We're not talking about statues or temples, which would crumble under glacial pressure. But information can take many forms. It could be microscopic, encoded in minerals, metals, or genetic material. It could exist as magnetic alignments or isotopic patterns deliberately arranged to outlast erosion. There are ways of writing that don't require words, and nature itself provides the template. If intelligence arose before us, whether human or something else, it might have learned to speak through the language of the planet itself. That's the thought that keeps some scientists awake at night, that the Earth might already hold messages we simply haven't learned to read. Not alien signals from the stars, but terrestrial ones, patterns of chemistry and geology too subtle for early science to notice. Ice could be part of that message, a medium chosen precisely because it conceals as it preserves. What better hiding place than one that looks like emptiness? Even now, researchers are developing instruments that can scan ice sheets with unprecedented precision. Ground-penetrating radar, gravity mapping, and neutrino detectors reveal structures kilometers below the surface. They show mountains, valleys, and subglacial lakes that have never seen light. Some of those lakes have been sealed for millions of years, forming isolated biospheres where evolution took a different path. In Lake Vostok, for instance, scientists detected traces of microbial DNA unrelated to anything known on the surface. Whether contamination or genuine isolation, the result is the same. Ice hides worlds within worlds. There's a quiet irony in how human curiosity mirrors the movement of ice itself. Slow, persistent, unstoppable. We chip away at the unknown layer by layer, patient but determined. The deeper we go, the more we uncover about ourselves. Every ice core tells us not only about ancient climates, but about how fragile and resilient life can be. It shows us that even in the harshest conditions, traces remain. That idea offers both comfort and warning. Comfort, because it means nothing is ever completely lost. Warning, because it means nothing is ever completely gone. The past always finds a way to return, sometimes in ways we don't expect. When the ice melts, it releases its memory into the air and sea. Carbon long trapped returns to the atmosphere. Microbes awaken. Metals leach into the water. It's as if the earth is exhaling after a long breath held through the ages. The past enters the present again, not as story but as matter. In that sense, we are living through a moment of remembrance. The glaciers are speaking, though their language is melting water, not words. Each drop carries information about what came before, a chemical memory, a signal from ancient days. If you listen closely, you might notice that the narrative of ice is also the narrative of forgetting. For every layer that preserves, another erases. Pressure turns soft snow into hard crystal, crushing air pockets, distorting records, blurring the edges. Memory degrades, just like human recollection. No record, natural or artificial, lasts forever, yet enough remains to reconstruct the shape of what was. That's what archaeologists, paleoclimatologists and storytellers share, the faith that fragments can reveal wholes. When we imagine the first civilization, the one that may have hidden its wisdom beneath the frost, perhaps we're really imagining ourselves, projected backward into deep time. The desire to store, to preserve, to be remembered. That's what makes us human. The ice embodies that desire on a planetary scale. It keeps what the Earth cannot bear to lose. In its stillness, it resists entropy for as long as it can, holding form against the chaos of heat and motion. Eventually, of course, it yields. But while it lasts, it is the purest archive we have. There's another layer to this thought. If the planet has memory, then so might other worlds. Mars, for instance, holds polar ice caps that expand and contract with the seasons. Beneath them may lie the record of an entire climatic history, maybe even traces of ancient life. Europa, one of Jupiter's moons, hides a global ocean under an icy crust. Saturn's moon, Enceladus, sprays plumes of frozen water into space, each particle carrying hints of what lies below. The memory of ice is not unique to Earth. It may be a universal property of worlds that hold water and time together. Perhaps every frozen planet in the cosmos keeps its own silent chronicle, waiting for curious beings to arrive and listen. If we could learn to read that language fully, we might discover that civilizations are not only born and lost on their surfaces, but also recorded within their very fabric. Ice becomes not just memory, but continuity, a medium through which the universe remembers itself. When you stand on a glacier and hear it crack beneath your feet, that sound is time adjusting itself. It's the planet turning a page, preparing the next layer for what comes next. In that way, we're already part of the memory. Every trace of us, our buildings, our satellites, our carbon, will eventually join those layers. Future scientists, or whoever inherits the planet, will find our era written in dust and isotopes, in microplastics and soot. We will be the next sediment, the next frozen story. And perhaps, if we are careful, we'll leave behind something more deliberate. A message for whoever comes after, one that says simply, we were here, and we tried to understand. The memory of ice doesn't belong to one civilization, or even to humanity. It belongs to the planet itself, to the slow intelligence of matter that remembers without meaning to. Every snowflake that lands becomes part of that archive, a data point in the grand experiment of existence. We may never find the first civilization beneath the ice, but the ice itself remains the first witness, patient and complete. And so the story moves onward, into deeper cold and deeper time, where memory waits not to be uncovered, but to be recognized. Somewhere below, in the quiet heart of the glaciers, the past is still breathing, faint and slow, ready to speak when we finally learn how to listen. The ice remembers what we cannot, but memory implies creation. To remember, something must first be built, shaped, or thought into being. It leads to an inevitable question, one that hums softly beneath every conversation about lost worlds. Who were the builders? The ones who might have lived before history began, who could have shaped their knowledge into something worth hiding, and then left it sleeping beneath the cold. The idea of forgotten builders has existed as long as stories themselves. Every culture, in one form or another, carries tales of those who came before. Beings who knew more, built greater, reached farther, and then vanished, leaving behind only traces of their existence. Sometimes they are called gods, sometimes giants, sometimes watchers or ancestors from a golden age. Their ruins, if they ever existed, would have become mountains, their roads buried beneath forests, their words lost to erosion and silence. And yet, even now, we sense their presence, not through evidence, but through intuition, that subtle feeling that the world has been lived in for longer than we can measure. It's tempting to imagine them as advanced, perhaps even more advanced than us, but advancement is a relative thing. We think of technology in terms of machines and metals, but knowledge does not always take those forms. What if the first civilization was advanced not in industry, but in understanding? A people who had learned how to live in balance with the planet's rhythms, who studied the stars, who understood that their time would end, and who acted accordingly. Perhaps their greatest invention was not a tool, but foresight. If such a civilization existed, its builders would have lived in an Earth that felt different. The continents were in roughly the same places, but the climate was unpredictable, swinging between warmth and ice. Great animals roamed the plains, the mammoths, the steppe lions, the giant sloths, and the early humans who watched them would have been part of that same ecosystem. They would have known the cold not as an obstacle but as a fact of life. Ice ages came and went, and life adapted in slow cycles. If intelligence had time to evolve before our own species took the stage, it might have arisen under conditions we would find almost impossible to imagine. Archaeology, as it stands, has uncovered no definitive proof of such people. The earliest known societies capable of large-scale architecture, Sumer, Egypt, the Indus Valley, China, all emerged within the last 10,000 years. Before that we find scattered settlements, stone tools, cave art and bones, but not cities or machines. Yet the absence of evidence is not quite the same as evidence of absence. The Earth is a restless custodian. It recycles itself. Mountains rise, seas swallow coastlines, deserts consume everything that doesn't move. In geological terms, 10,000 years is a blink, 50,000 years, a breath, 100,000, a sigh. In that time, entire landscapes can vanish without leaving a single brick behind. If the forgotten builders left anything, it would likely not be on the surface. It might be deep within layers of sediment, under the sea, or locked in the ice. The continents that exist today are only the most recent version of the Earth's shifting puzzle. Sea levels have risen and fallen by hundreds of meters over time. Coastlines have moved, rivers have changed direction, islands have emerged and sunk. Every now and then, sonar scans pick up strange shapes beneath the waves, rectangular patterns, terraces, steps carved into submerged cliffs. Some turn out to be natural formations, others remain ambiguous. Japan's Yonaguni Monument is one of the most famous of these. Beneath the clear waters off Okinawa lies a massive stone structure that looks uncannily deliberate, with flat surfaces, sharp corners, and platforms that resemble stairs. Some geologists call it a natural formation shaped by tectonic uplift. Others suggest it may have been modified by human hands before the sea swallowed it, perhaps 12,000 years ago, around the end of the last ice age. If it were man-made, it would rewrite everything we know about the origins of complex society. And yet science treads carefully here. It must. For every genuine mystery, there are dozens of illusions, nature's uncanny ability to mimic human design. But the fascination persists because the possibility itself is powerful. It makes us question the neat story we tell about progress. We like to think civilization began once, in one place, at one time. But perhaps it began many times, in cycles, each leaving behind fragments, lessons, warnings. Perhaps the forgotten builders were not a single people, but many, separated by distance and epoch, connected only by the same impulse to create, to preserve, to understand. If we could step back into that world, before cities, before maps, what would we see? Perhaps clusters of people along temperate coasts building with wood and stone, shaping their environment with care rather than conquest. Their technologies might have been simple to our eyes, but perfectly tuned to their needs. Navigation by stars, knowledge of the seasons, tools of bone and bronze, languages we no longer recognize. We might not even recognize their traces as artificial. A perfectly balanced system leaves little waste, little scar. Maybe their disappearance wasn't destruction, but choice. Maybe they saw the cycles coming and decided to retreat from them, leaving their knowledge in the safest possible vault, the ice. When scientists speak of prehistory, they often divide it into the Paleolithic, Mesolithic and Neolithic, the long ages of stone. But stone is only what survives. There may have been entire eras defined by materials that decay, technologies that leave no mark, wood, fabric, resin, organic composites. These things vanish in centuries. Even steel returns to dust in less than 100,000 years. If civilization had existed before our own, it might have left behind only the most durable things, perhaps buried beyond reach. And so we dig, drill and scan, trying to read a planet that keeps rewriting itself. Across myths and religions, stories of the builders echo with surprising consistency. The Sumerians spoke of the Anunnaki, gods or perhaps kings who came from the heavens to shape humanity. The Dogon people of Mali tell of beings from the star Sirius who taught them the patterns of the sky. The Hopi remember the ant people, who lived underground and sheltered humans during times of catastrophe. In South America, Viracocha is said to have created the world and then departed across the ocean, promising to return. Even in the cold myths of the north, there are whispers of architects who forged the world from ice and fire, who built realms beneath glaciers. Each story differs in name and setting, but their rhythm is the same. Beings who build, teach, vanish, and leave the world changed. It would be easy to dismiss these stories as metaphor, but metaphor often grows from memory. The details distort with time, but the essence remains. Floods become moral tales, builders become gods, memory becomes myth. If the forgotten builders once lived, perhaps they are remembered not in ruins but in archetypes. The bringer of knowledge, the teacher of crafts, the traveller from a vanished land. Our ancestors, lacking the vocabulary of science, would have described them as divine because they seemed to know too much. There's a certain humility in the thought that we might be repeating someone else's experiment. We dig into the earth for resources, alter the atmosphere, and change the climate. If those before us did the same, maybe their story ended in ice, and we are watching ours approach a similar horizon. Perhaps their warning is still there, frozen beneath the poles, waiting for us to read it. If that's true, the greatest irony is that we might find it only because the ice is melting again. The forgotten builders may not have built pyramids of stone. They might have built in ways that integrated with nature. Forests planted in geometric patterns, landscapes shaped to align with stars. Such work could easily vanish under thousands of years of wind and frost, leaving only faint traces in soil chemistry or magnetism. Some satellite imagery of ancient landscapes has revealed exactly that. Subtle lines of vegetation or elevation that reveal former human activity invisible from the ground. Perhaps one day, Similar technology will map the subglacial world and find something equally unexplainable. In a sense, the question of who the builders were might matter less than what they represent. They are the embodiment of continuity, the idea that intelligence on this planet is older and more persistent than we can measure. Whether they were us in an earlier form or something entirely different, they represent the same instinct: to create, to understand, to survive beyond one's own time. Every tool we make, every archive we store, every signal we send into space is part of that same lineage. We are all forgotten builders eventually, contributing to a structure so vast that we can't see it from within. If one listens carefully to the rhythms of nature, one can almost feel the trace of intention in the ice itself. The way glaciers advance and retreat, the way meltwater shapes intricate channels beneath the surface, the way frozen layers trap not only air and dust but microscopic fragments of the living world. It's as though the Earth keeps building and rebuilding itself in imitation of us, or perhaps we in imitation of it. The idea of architecture expands beyond stone and metal to include cycles, systems, feedback loops. The planet is the ultimate engineer. Perhaps those ancient builders learned directly from it, treating the Earth not as a resource but as a partner. If that were so, then their knowledge might not have been technological at all in our sense. It could have been ecological, philosophical, even spiritual, an understanding of how to live within limits. That kind of knowledge leaves no ruins, yet it may be the most enduring of all. When we dig beneath the ice or dive beneath the sea, maybe what we're really searching for is evidence of that wisdom, not machines or cities, but proof that living intelligently means living gently. Still, the imagination lingers on the possibility of something tangible. A chamber sealed under ice, walls smooth as glass, inscriptions unreadable but deliberate, instruments preserved in frozen air, powered by forces we no longer use. It sounds like fantasy, but then so did flight, space travel, and atoms once. Every age believes it understands its boundaries until those boundaries shift. The discovery of such a relic would be the greatest revelation in human history. But perhaps it would also be the most sobering. It would mean that we are not the first to reach for permanence, and that even those who achieved it could not escape the erasure of time. In the end, whether the forgotten builders were real or imagined, their story serves a purpose. It reminds us that memory requires effort, that preservation is not guaranteed, and that wisdom must be renewed rather than merely stored. The ice may hold their legacy, but it's up to us to interpret it, to learn from the silence rather than fill it with noise. Somewhere beneath miles of frozen weight, rivers still move, carrying the silt of buried mountains. If you could follow one of those rivers far enough, you might reach a cavern of untouched air sealed since before the last warm age. In that darkness, crystals would hang like chandeliers, and the temperature would never change. It would feel like stepping into eternity, a place where time has stopped to take a breath. And maybe, just maybe, there would be a mark on the wall, a symbol carved by hands long gone. Not a message in words, but in shape, in intent. A sign that someone else once stood there, looking out at a world already vanishing, and decided to leave something behind. The ice above would continue to grow, slowly burying it deeper each century until the builders themselves were forgotten. Their cities turned to myth, their names lost to dust. Yet beneath it all, the mark would remain, waiting for warmth, for discovery, for another civilization to awaken curiosity once more. Perhaps that's what all knowledge is, a message across time, written by those who knew they would be forgotten but hoped to be remembered anyway. As we stand now, looking at melting glaciers, thawing tundra, and the shifting poles, we might be closer to those ancient builders than we realize. We are watching the same forces that ended their world begin to move through ours. The ice recedes, revealing layers of time we didn't know existed. Fossils, pollen, preserved bones, the faint murmurs of previous ages. In those whispers, we might eventually hear them again, Not as legends, not as gods, but as kin, reaching across the cold with one final lesson about how fragile civilization really is. And as the wind moves softly over the frozen plains, carrying the sound of cracking ice and distant snowdrifts, we realise that maybe the builders were never truly gone. Maybe we are simply their latest continuation, still building, still forgetting, still remembering, still listening. The cold holds many things, but it does not hold stillness. Even in silence, the ice hums with its own secret energy. The poles are alive in ways we can barely perceive, speaking in frequencies too low for human ears or too subtle for our eyes. Scientists who have worked in the Antarctic interior often describe a feeling of vibration beneath their feet, like the ground itself is breathing. It is not a sound in the air, but in the body, a faint trembling that seeps through boots and bones. They call it ice quakes, the cracking of glaciers under stress. But to anyone standing alone on that endless white plain, it feels more like the earth is whispering something old, something untranslatable, signals in the silence. If there truly was an ancient civilization hidden beneath the ice, these signals would be the last traces of its existence, fragments of intention embedded in the natural noise. But even if no human hand ever carved or encoded them, the planet itself is full of messages. The challenge lies in learning to read them. Every vibration, every magnetic anomaly, every deviation in temperature or gravity tells a story about what lies below. In a place as vast and unmapped as Antarctica, those stories remain largely unread. The first people to listen seriously to these signals were not dreamers or mystics, but geophysicists. In the early decades of polar exploration, they dragged crude instruments across the ice, measuring gravity, magnetism, and seismic waves. Their goal was simple: to map the unseen land beneath. What they found was anything but simple. The continent turned out to be a mosaic of hidden mountains, valleys, and basins. Some of those features matched no known pattern of geology. Beneath the East Antarctic ice sheet, they discovered areas where gravity fluctuated dramatically, as though the rock below contained voids or densities that didn't belong. When radar imaging improved in the 20th century, those regions revealed structures that some described as oddly symmetrical. Ridges aligned in parallel, circular depressions, straight lines that extended for miles. Most explanations pointed to natural processes, glacial erosion, tectonic uplift, volcanic formations, yet the images carried a peculiar precision, one that invited speculation. The human brain, after all, is designed to find patterns. It's how we survived. Reading faces, tracking stars, noticing rhythm where others saw chaos. Sometimes we see too much, but every so often a pattern resists easy dismissal. One such region lies beneath the ice near Wilkes Land, where satellite data shows a massive circular formation about 300 kilometers wide. Some scientists attribute it to the impact of a giant meteorite millions of years ago. Others suggest it could be the remnants of a colossal volcanic dome. And then there are those who quietly wonder if it might be something else. Not an impact, but a structure. A ring of unknown origin buried under miles of frozen water. The debate continues, cautious but unresolved. If you listen to the signals collected from those areas, the seismic readings, the magnetic sweeps, they sound almost musical. Low-frequency pulses, steady and rhythmic, repeating at intervals that don't quite match natural cycles. Most are explainable. Tides, shifting ice, seasonal pressure changes. Yet some remain anomalous. In 2018, researchers at the University of Chicago detected a repeating pulse under the Ross ice shelf. It occurred every 12 minutes, a steady vibration travelling through the ice and into the sea. They traced it to the movement of meltwater draining through subglacial channels, but even knowing the cause doesn't make it less strange. Nature hums in patterns, and sometimes those patterns feel too deliberate to ignore. For anyone who believes that something older might be hidden there, Such signals become irresistible clues. They imagine that perhaps buried deep beneath the cold, an ancient mechanism still stirs. Not a machine in the modern sense, but something designed to last. A device, a vault, a transmitter left to wait for a species capable of hearing it. The rational mind resists the idea, but the imagination persists, fed by every unexplained measurement, every flicker in magnetic data. The unknown leaves room for wonder, and wonder is fertile ground for questions science hasn't yet answered. To understand how the planet might carry such signals, we have to think of it as an instrument. The crust, the mantle, the oceans and the ice all interact, producing vibrations that echo through the globe. Earthquakes send ripples that travel thousands of kilometers. Volcanic activity creates harmonic tremors. Even winds can generate microseisms, faint sounds that pass unnoticed by human ears but register on sensitive instruments. These signals are not random, they are the language of a living world. When translated into data, they form intricate patterns, waveforms that scientists use to infer what lies beneath. Some call it Earth's music, a symphony of pressure and resonance. In Antarctica, that music is amplified by isolation. The ice acts as both insulator and resonator, channeling vibrations in strange ways. Sound can travel hundreds of kilometers through the frozen layers with little loss. Seismic waves bounce off hidden mountains, refract through subglacial lakes, and emerge altered but coherent. When scientists place sensors in arrays across the continent, they can triangulate the origins of these signals, constructing maps of the unseen terrain. What they find is a landscape both alien and familiar, mountain ranges as tall as the Alps, canyons deeper than the Grand Canyon, and valleys filled with liquid water despite the sub-zero temperatures above. That water is particularly intriguing. Under the immense pressure of the ice, and warmed slightly by geothermal heat, hundreds of lakes exist beneath the Antarctic surface. Some are small pockets, others are vast inland seas sealed away for millions of years. Lake Vostok, the largest of them, is the size of Lake Ontario. When scientists first drilled toward it, they did so with extreme caution, afraid of contamination or sudden eruptions of pressure. When they finally sampled its water, they found life, not the kind we know, but microbial species adapted to total darkness, pressure, and isolation. Some of their DNA sequences were unlike anything in known databases. It was a glimpse into an independent ecosystem, one that had evolved in silence. If life can persist there, sealed away for epochs, then perhaps other things can too. Some of the instruments left near Lake Vostok and other subglacial regions have recorded faint electromagnetic pulses, short bursts of energy that repeat sporadically, often during shifts in temperature or pressure. Most scientists attribute them to natural piezoelectric effects, the release of charge as ice crystals deform. But again, there is something in the pattern that invites curiosity. The pulses come in clusters, sometimes at frequencies too regular to dismiss as random. They sound like coded signals, though we know they're not. Still, for a listener alone in the polar night, surrounded by static and wind, it would be easy to believe the ice is trying to communicate. Every generation of explorers feels that same temptation, to imagine consciousness in the landscape. The first whalers to reach the southern seas spoke of eerie lights beneath the water, long flashes of green and blue that moved against the current. They called them sea spirits, not knowing they were the glow of bioluminescent plankton. Later, scientists would see the auroras above the poles, curtains of light that ripple and dance silently, and feel the same awe. These are signals too, born from the interaction of solar wind and Earth's magnetic field. The poles are where the planet opens itself to the cosmos, letting energy pour in. If one wanted to send or receive messages across space, the poles would be the natural antennae. That fact has not gone unnoticed. Over the decades, researchers have installed radio observatories and neutrino detectors across Antarctica, to study cosmic phenomena. They listened for high-energy particles from distant galaxies, for faint echoes of the universe's beginning. Buried deep in the ice is an experiment called IceCube, a massive array of sensors spread over a cubic kilometre. It listens not to sound but to light. Flashes produced when neutrinos pass through the ice. Most of those neutrinos come from cosmic rays, but a few originate closer to home, from the atmosphere, the sun, even the Earth's core. In a way, IceCube is humanity's first true attempt to use the planet itself as a detector to turn the ice into an ear. The fact that it works suggests that ice is not just a medium for memory, but for perception. It can receive and transmit, however faintly, the signals of the universe. Imagine then what an earlier civilization might have done with that knowledge if they understood the properties of ice, its transparency, its resonance, its stability. They might have used it as we use fibre optics or semiconductors, a natural material for communication. The idea sounds fantastical, but so did radio before its discovery. The principles are the same: vibration, frequency, transmission through a medium. Ice, especially pure Antarctic ice, is nearly perfect in its clarity. Light can travel through it with minimal distortion. It stores electrical charge and conducts sound efficiently. It could, theoretically, carry information over great distances. If such technology existed, its remnants would be nearly impossible to detect. Over time, the ice would deform, compress, and erase most traces, but perhaps not all. Deep radar scans occasionally reveal anomalies, areas where signals scatter oddly, or where reflections suggest inclusions that don't match known materials. Most are explained as volcanic rock or pockets of brine, yet a few remain unexplained, small enough to be ignored, intriguing enough to be remembered. One day, when drilling becomes cheaper and cleaner, we may sample those regions directly. Until then, they remain part of the mystery, the background hum of questions we can't yet answer. For scientists who spend months isolated on the ice, the sense of being surrounded by unseen forces can be overwhelming. The silence amplifies every thought. Radios crackle with interference, compasses drift. The magnetic poles themselves move each year, slowly but unpredictably. Instruments must constantly recalibrate. It gives the impression that the Earth's heartbeat is irregular, unpredictable, alive. During long nights when the sun doesn't rise for months, even the most rational minds feel the pull of imagination. They begin to hear meaning in the static, rhythm in the wind, language in the creak of ice. Perhaps that's the oldest form of human creativity, finding pattern in chaos, listening until randomness begins to sound like design. The signals in the silence remind us that knowledge doesn't always come through words. The universe speaks in vibration, and everything that exists is part of that conversation. From the resonance of atoms to the hum of galaxies, from seismic rumbles to neural pulses, it is all one continuous field of communication. The builders, if they existed, might have known that better than we do. Maybe their messages were never written or carved, but encoded in frequencies, electromagnetic, acoustic, gravitational, woven into the structure of the planet itself. If so, we may already be surrounded by their messages without knowing how to listen properly. In a way, that is what science tries to do, to learn the language of the world. Each new instrument we invent is an ear or an eye tuned to a different wavelength. We have become a civilization of listeners, scanning the sky for radio bursts, the oceans for sonar echoes, the earth for seismic murmurs. We are trying to hear what has been speaking all along. The forgotten builders, the ice, the planet, the cosmos. They are all part of the same choir, performing a piece we have only just begun to recognize. When the polar wind dies and the night grows still, the quiet becomes almost unbearable. It's in that stillness that the most delicate signals emerge, the faint pops of ice adjusting to stress, the distant roar of a calving glacier, the deep subsonic hum of tectonic motion. Each sound is a line of data, a fragment of story. Together, they create a constant low-frequency music that fills the Earth. It never stops, not even when we stop listening. The planet remembers through sound, and maybe that's what the ice has been trying to tell us, that silence is only the limit of our perception, not the absence of meaning. Beneath the poles, there are still regions we have never scanned, valleys so deep that our instruments cannot yet see the bottom. They remain blank spaces on our maps, the last true mysteries on Earth. Somewhere in those shadows, perhaps, the oldest signals continue to resonate, waiting for us to learn how to decode them. Whether they are natural or crafted, random or deliberate, doesn't change their beauty. The silence itself becomes the message, a reminder that the world is always speaking, even when we don't understand the words. And as the ice shifts, cracking softly under its own weight, a faint vibration travels outward through stone and water, through air and sky, reaching us in ways we can't yet measure. We call it noise or data or anomaly, but maybe it's something simpler, the sound of memory itself, echoing through the ages, asking if we are finally ready to listen. The ice has no shelves, no walls, no doors, yet it holds the greatest library on Earth, not one built by hands or designed by architects, but by the slow patience of nature itself. Every layer, every trapped particle, every frozen current of air is a page pressed into the body of the planet. The library that sleeps cold is not a metaphor. It is a literal archive, immense and silent, recording the story of the world in the only medium that cannot lie. When we speak of libraries, we imagine knowledge organised, labelled, accessible. The frozen library of the poles is the opposite. Its catalogue is chaos, its volumes are pressure and light. It doesn't present its information willingly. It must be extracted with care, interpreted with humility. Scientists drill for samples as librarians of the impossible, retrieving pages of frozen atmosphere that have waited hundreds of thousands of years to be read. Those pages do not speak in language, but in chemistry, in ratios of carbon to oxygen, in isotopes of hydrogen that trace the temperature of ancient rain. Reading them requires translation from the language of atoms into the language of time. It's easy to forget how much we've already learned from that frozen archive. The first ice cores pulled from Greenland in the mid-20th century revealed the heartbeat of the planet's climate. Not random fluctuation, but a rhythm. Warm ages and cold ages rising and falling like tides, each cycle about 100,000 years long. Within those patterns, scientists found traces of sudden catastrophic events, volcanic winters, meteor impacts, bursts of solar radiation. They discovered that the Earth has never been static, that it changes in pulses, and that life rides those pulses like a fragile raft. The ice told us that stability is an illusion. Everything moves, even the cold. But what else does the library hold? What chapters of the story are still unread? Beneath the standard record of gases and dust, there are subtler signatures, microscopic remains of pollen, spores, microorganisms, and even fragments of DNA. These traces reveal how ecosystems shifted as climates changed, how forests advanced and retreated, how species survived or disappeared. Every layer is a snapshot of life itself, and sometimes the ice surprises us. In one core extracted from Antarctica, researchers found ancient bacteria still viable after 500,000 years. When they thawed them, the organisms stirred, alive again in a world that had long forgotten them. That moment, a scientist watching life awaken from the deep past, was a reminder that the library does not merely store knowledge, it preserves potential. If the first civilization truly hid their wisdom beneath the ice, this would have been their perfect medium. Cold preserves structure, isolation prevents decay. But even more than that, ice conceals. It protects by being inaccessible. The poles are the most unforgiving environments on Earth. To hide something, there is to hide it from everything. War, weather, time. No human would stumble upon it by chance. Only deliberate seekers with patience and science could ever hope to find it. That is the brilliance of the idea. A vault not built of stone but of climate. A library that only opens when the world grows warm enough to ask for it again. We have already created our own versions of such cold archives. The Global Seed Vault in Svalbard, deep within the Arctic permafrost, holds millions of seeds from every corner of the planet, a genetic backup of biodiversity sleeping in darkness. In Switzerland, data centres are being built into mountains, cooled naturally by ice and rock. Scientists store digital genomes, cultural artefacts, even works of art in conditions meant to last centuries. We trust the cold to guard what we fear to lose. And yet, we may simply be repeating an older pattern, echoing the instincts of a civilization long vanished. They too might have turned to the cold when the world grew unstable, choosing endurance over presence, silence over ruin. Imagine walking into such a library if it exists. You would not see books or scrolls. You would see corridors of frozen clarity, walls layered with pale blue light, each stratum a year, a century, a millennium. In some layers, faint shapes would glimmer, inclusions, bubbles, perhaps something not entirely natural. The air would be perfectly still, the temperature constant, the pressure immense. It would feel less like entering a room and more like entering the memory of the earth itself. If knowledge was stored there, it would not be written in letters or carved in stone. It would be encoded in form, in the alignment of crystals, in the arrangement of atoms, in the rhythm of structure repeating itself down the ages. There are scientists who have begun to think along similar lines. The field of data storage has reached a strange frontier where physical materials can be programmed to contain information. DNA, for instance, can hold vast amounts of data, millions of times more than a hard drive of the same size. Researchers have successfully encoded entire books, movies, even software into synthetic DNA strands, then frozen them for long-term storage. In the right conditions, such data could survive for millions of years. If we can do this now, what might have been possible to those who came before, given time and insight? Perhaps they found a way to weave information into the molecular lattice of ice itself, a form of data that could only be read once the technology to decode it existed again. This is not as far-fetched as it sounds. Crystals can trap impurities in precise patterns. These patterns, when analysed, can reveal changes in temperature, radiation, even magnetic fields over time. In other words, they are natural data storage devices. To a mind that understood how to manipulate them, they could become intentional ones. It may be that we have already handled such records without recognising them. To us they appear as random inclusions, but to another species, or another age, they might have been libraries in plain sight. The deeper we go into the ice, the stranger the data becomes. At certain depths, isotopic ratios begin to shift in ways that defy easy explanation. Some researchers attribute this to ancient cosmic events, perhaps supernova radiation or fluctuations in the Earth's magnetic field. But others, more cautious and curious, have noticed regularity in the irregular, patterns that repeat at intervals not quite geological, not quite random. They look almost like intentional encoding, a signal written in the chemistry of ice. No one claims it is, of course. Science must resist that temptation. Yet the question lingers, quiet and unspoken. What if nature itself was taught to remember? There are other mysteries too. Deep radar scans sometimes detect layers that reflect differently, as if composed of materials foreign to the surrounding ice. Metallic traces, silicate dust, even structured voids that could be caverns. Some are explained by volcanic ash from ancient eruptions, but a few are anomalous enough to provoke speculation. If a civilization truly buried its legacy there, perhaps these anomalies are the corners of its design, the perimeters of vaults built not with walls but with temperature gradients and density changes. Such a library would not decay or flood. It would only grow colder, more stable, until the time came for the ice to melt. It's strange to realise how much of human progress depends on forgetting. Each generation builds on fragments of what came before, yet loses something in the process. Entire languages vanish, entire sciences fade. The library that sleeps cold offers an antidote to that. It is pure memory, untouched by culture or politics. It stores without judgment. It cannot edit or censor. It only waits. In that sense, it is the most impartial witness imaginable. When scientists read an ice core, they are not interpreting myth or inscription. They are listening directly to the planet's testimony. Perhaps that is the truest meaning of this frozen library, that it is not ours alone. It is the archive of every species, every climate, every event that shaped this world. The first civilization, if it existed, would have known that they could not separate their story from the planet's story. By placing their knowledge in the ice, they would have ensured that it remained part of a greater whole. Their library would not stand apart from nature, but within it, inseparable from the flow of geological time. There's a certain comfort in thinking of a knowledge that way, not as possession, but as participation. What we learn, what we record, becomes part of the Earth's own self-knowledge. The ice, the rock, the atmosphere and the sea all hold pieces of our existence. Even if our species disappears, those traces will persist for a while, folded into the planet's ongoing archive. Future beings, human or otherwise, might one day decode them, reading our era as we now read the past. In that way, we too are writing into the frozen library, whether we mean to or not. As the climate warms, the library begins to open. Glaciers retreat, permafrost thaws, and with them come old pages rising to the surface. Ancient air escapes into the atmosphere. Pollen from vanished forests drifts again. The smell of millennia seeps into the wind. It's a bittersweet revelation. We gain access to the past only by losing it. The same warmth that melts the ice enough for us to study it also destroys what it preserves. We're reading the library as it burns, decoding its volumes as they dissolve into water. That knowledge brings a certain responsibility. To read the frozen record is to understand our place in it as inheritors, not owners. The ice is a teacher, patient and quiet. It shows us how small we are compared to time, how fragile our civilizations truly are. Yet it also shows us how persistence works, through layering, repetition, endurance. The library does not fight entropy. It simply slows it down enough for meaning to accumulate. Somewhere in the vast interior of Antarctica, beyond the reach of any current expedition, there may be layers untouched by human tools. If the oldest secrets of the Earth or of a vanished civilization are stored anywhere, they are there, in the deep cold where pressure and silence guard them perfectly. It's possible that even now, within that frozen core, something remains. Not alive in the biological sense, but alive in purpose. A record waiting for recognition. When future scientists drill deeper, perhaps they will find it, not with awe or fear, but with quiet understanding. It will not be revelation, but reunion. Until then, the library sleeps. Its corridors stretch through ice and memory, through time itself. Every echo of wind above, every fracture within, becomes another note in its unending composition. The planet hums softly through it, turning pages no one can see. And as we listen from the warmth of our small, brief age, we begin to realize that the real mystery is not whether the first civilization left its wisdom beneath the ice, but whether we are wise enough to hear it when the cold finally speaks. The ice does not melt suddenly. It sighs, it weeps, it forgets in fragments. The thaw comes slowly at first, a whisper in the data, a shimmer in satellite imagery, a trickle at the edge of glaciers where water wasn't meant to be. Then, as years gather, it becomes something more, not a season, but a transformation. The Great Thaw is not just a physical event, it is an unravelling of memory. The planet, long composed and still, begins to move again. The cold archive that once held the record of ages starts to dissolve, releasing its secrets into the air drop by drop. Every glacier carries within it the imprint of time, trapped gases, dust, microbes, fragments of forgotten worlds. As the ice melts, all of it returns to circulation. The breath of ancient forests escapes again into the atmosphere. Pollen that once drifted through prehistoric air settles on modern soil. Microbes long dormant awaken, find light and die in seconds. For the first time in thousands of years, these things meet the world we have built. Our cities, our machines, our noise. The meeting is brief and unbalanced, like 2 pages of a book pressed together by accident, their meanings blending only for a moment before separating forever. Scientists studying glacial melt describe it clinically. Cubic kilometres of water lost per year, percentages of ice mass decline, measurements of sea level rise. But beneath those numbers lies something quieter and stranger. The planet is giving back what it kept safe for millennia, but in doing so, it is erasing it. Each droplet of meltwater carries information that once belonged to a frozen record. Once liquid, that data disperses, mixing with oceans, evaporating into clouds. The library that slept cold is dissolving into weather. Its knowledge becomes air. It's a paradox that would have fascinated any civilization wise enough to understand cycles. Preservation requires cold, but renewal requires warmth. You cannot have one without losing the other. The great Thor may be the planet's natural way of balancing those opposites, a periodic forgetting that allows life to continue. Yet, for the first time, this cycle is being accelerated by us. Human activity has turned the slow rhythm of geological time into a pulse measured in decades. The world warms faster than it ever has before, and the ice responds with urgency. The consequences are visible from space. Glaciers retreat like fading memories, revealing valleys unseen for tens of thousands of years. Rivers that once lay dormant now carve new paths across the landscape. Ice shelves, once stable for centuries, break apart in spectacular collapses that send ripples through the oceans. Each event is both an ending and an unveiling. Beneath the melting layers, scientists discover soil that has not touched the open air since before humanity built its first city. They find fossils, wood, traces of bacteria, and sometimes things that defy classification. Odd mineral structures, frozen filaments, patterns that could be natural or something else entirely. When these discoveries make headlines, they are presented as marvels of science. But to those who stand there in the cold, watching the ice retreat, they feel like encounters with ghosts. Everything that emerges from the melt carries the weight of time. A leaf from an ancient tree, still green in the ice but brown by the time it's photographed. A bone from an extinct animal revealed by sunlight for the first time in 100 centuries. Even the air that escapes from bubbles in melting glaciers has a scent, a faint sweetness that lingers for only seconds before it vanishes. You could say that the planet is exhaling its history, one breath at a time. If the first civilization did hide something beneath the ice, this is the moment when its vault would begin to open. Not because we search for it deliberately, but because we have forced the ice to yield. The warmth we created through industry, through cities, through fire and fuel, has become the key that unlocks the frozen past. But it's a careless key. It opens everything at once. Whatever knowledge might have been sealed, there emerges into a world too chaotic to notice. We study climate data, record temperatures, measure melt rates, and miss the subtler revelation that the Earth is remembering. In Greenland, meltwater lakes appear each summer, glittering like eyes across the white expanse. They are transient, forming and draining within days. Some of them plunge straight into the glacier, carving vertical tunnels called moulins that carry water to the bedrock below. These moulins act like arteries, channeling warmth deep into the ice and hastening its collapse. To stand near one is to hear the sound of the world dissolving, a roar so deep it vibrates in the chest. That sound travels far through the glacier, a reminder that even in decay, the ice has music. The forgotten builders, if they exist, might have chosen this medium precisely because of that property. The way sound moves through cold solidity, preserving not just form, but vibration. There's an eerie symmetry in how the great Thor mirrors human history. We too are releasing stored energy, in our case, the carbon buried in the earth for millions of years. Fossil fuels are ancient sunlight, compressed and hidden beneath stone. In burning them, we are performing our own act of remembrance, summoning the heat of past worlds. The cost of that act is the Thor. Every plume of smoke, every invisible gas molecule contributes to the warming that awakens the ice. It's as though we've triggered an echo, an answer from the deep cold to the fire we've rekindled. For scientists, the data is clear. The ice cores show that carbon dioxide levels are now higher than they have been in at least 800,000 years. The patterns of temperature, sea level and ice volume repeat in cycles, but this time the curve bends sharply upward, out of rhythm. The last time the Earth saw similar warmth, the seas were meters higher, forests grew near the poles, and much of today's land was underwater. We are, in a sense, resurrecting that ancient world, but without the time to adapt to it. The ice knows this before we do. It responds instantly, melting from beneath as warm ocean currents eat away at its base. Beneath Antarctica, researchers have discovered vast networks of subglacial rivers, channels of liquid water that flow beneath miles of ice. Some connect to lakes, others vanish into unknown depths. These hidden waterways move heat and minerals in ways we barely understand. They may even act as lubricants, hastening the movement of entire ice sheets toward the sea. Each year, satellites track that motion with increasing precision. The data shows acceleration. The great ice shelves that once seemed immovable are slipping faster. The frozen continents are beginning to shift their weight, redistributing mass, altering the balance of the planet itself. If the world's first civilization had understood this cycle, they might have foreseen their own disappearance. Perhaps they watched the ice grow, knew that warmth would one day return, and calculated when it would reveal what they left behind. If so, they would also have known that their revelation would coincide with danger. The same forces that uncover knowledge also threaten to drown it. Rising seas would flood archives before they could be found. Meltwater would erase markings before they could be read. The truth would emerge and vanish in the same moment, visible only in fragments, a half-remembered dream glimpsed before waking. This paradox defines our moment. As the ice releases its history, we race to capture it. Scientists collect cores, measure melt rates, and sample permafrost in an attempt to preserve what is being lost. Each sample is a rescue, a tiny piece of the library salvaged before it dissolves. Some of these samples contain viruses and bacteria from epochs long past, frozen pathogens that never encountered our immune systems. Their revival is both fascinating and unsettling. They remind us that the past is not inert. It can awaken, unpredictable and uninvited. The Thor is not just physical, but symbolic. It mirrors the unfreezing of knowledge itself. Information once buried or ignored now rising to the surface. In the last century, technology has accelerated our ability to see, measure, and record. We can read the planet's temperature from orbit, map ocean currents, detect gravitational waves. Yet for all our data, the deeper meanings slip through our fingers. We know what is happening, but not how to respond to it wisely. The ice melts, and we argue about numbers. In the quietest moments of field research, when the instruments are still and the wind drops, there's a sound that scientists often describe but rarely write about. It's the faint, rhythmic cracking of ice shifting. Tiny pops and sighs that echo like distant rain. They happen constantly, even when the air is still. Some compare it to breathing. In that sound, one hears the planet adjusting, releasing tension accumulated over centuries. It's beautiful and unnerving, the auditory shape of change. There's a theory among glaciologists that some meltwater channels form patterns that are not random, but self-organizing. The flow of water beneath ice follows laws of physics that mimic neural networks, branching, connecting, optimizing paths. The ice, in this sense, thinks, not consciously but structurally. It processes input, redistributes stress, adapts to new conditions. When you view satellite imagery of melt patterns, the resemblance to brain scans is uncanny. The same fractal patterns appear in rivers, trees, lightning, and neurons. The planet remembers by repeating itself. The Thor doesn't erase memory entirely, it transfers it to new forms. For every fragment that vanishes, something else begins. Meltwater feeds oceans, oceans feed clouds, clouds return as rain. Knowledge too transforms. The information once stored in ice becomes part of atmosphere and sea, influencing weather, biology, even human imagination. The myths of floods and rebirth may come from this deep pattern. Civilizations witnessing the Earth's natural cycle of forgetting and remembering. Perhaps the first civilization was destroyed by such a Thor, and their story survives in ours as warning, as prophecy, or as simple inevitability. When explorers first reached Antarctica's coast, they imagined it as eternal, a land beyond change. Even now, the scale of it defies comprehension, a continent larger than Europe, covered by ice kilometers thick. Yet within a human lifetime, it is shifting. Ice shelves the size of cities have collapsed. Glaciers have retreated dozens of miles. Whole regions that were once blank white are now streaked with rivers. Beneath the surface, sediments that haven't moved since before the dawn of agriculture are stirring. In this movement, we can almost feel the pulse of the ancient world returning, slow but unstoppable. The truth vanishes not because it is destroyed, but because it becomes too large to hold. The ice once solid turns fluid. Memory becomes current. In the same way, human knowledge expands beyond what we can fully grasp. Data accumulates faster than understanding. The more we uncover, the less we seem to know. The great Thor, both environmental and intellectual, floods us with revelation and confusion alike. There's a haunting symmetry in this, that the price of seeing deeper into the past is the loss of the medium that preserved it. To uncover the truth, we must watch it disappear. It's an echo of the Heisenberg uncertainty that runs through physics. The act of observation changes what is observed. As we study the ice, we melt it. As we learn its secrets, we erase its pages. We cannot separate knowledge from consequence. Perhaps that is the final safeguard built into this planetary system, a kind of cosmic humility. The ice offers its wisdom only once, and only to those who arrive at the right moment. Too early and it is inaccessible. Too late and it is gone. We are living in that narrow window, the intersection between discovery and disappearance. Whatever we learn now, we may never learn again. And so the great Thor continues. The air warms, the seas rise, and the past returns to the present for a brief, luminous interval. The ice releases its voices, the murmur of water, the sigh of carbon, the faint breath of extinct forests. Each drop carries the ghost of a world that once was. Somewhere in that release, maybe, lies the message of the first civilization, not written in symbols or stone, but in the act itself. A warning, perhaps, or an offering. That all knowledge is temporary, that all archives melt, that wisdom must live, not sleep. As the sun hangs low over the horizon, its light glinting across fields of melting ice, the air seems to shimmer with memory. What was frozen returns to motion. What was silent begins to speak again, not in language, but in sound, in water, in warmth. The earth remembers, and in that remembrance we see ourselves reflected, fragile, curious, fleeting, and alive in the brief moment before the truth vanishes once more. When the ice melts, the world begins to remember in other ways, not just through climate or chemistry, but through story. Myths rise like fog from the valleys of time, carrying shapes and meanings that refuse to disappear. They drift between cultures, taking on new names, new forms, yet always telling something that feels older than words. These echoes, passed from voice to voice across generations, may be the oldest surviving record of all. Long before ink, before paper, before the first carved tablet, knowledge lived in memory, the one archive that could move, adapt, and survive the collapse of everything else. The myths of the world, scattered across continents and languages, share a strange kinship. They speak of floods, of fire, of creation and loss, of knowledge given and taken. They describe gods or teachers descending from the sky, or rising from the sea, or emerging from the earth to guide humanity and then vanish. These stories appear among people who never met, who lived oceans apart. Their details vary, but their rhythm is the same. Something comes before us, something greater, something that leaves, and something that returns. Anthropologists often call this the flood motif, a narrative pattern so persistent it appears in almost every known culture. The story begins with a world destroyed by water. Sometimes it's punishment, sometimes it's renewal. A few survive. A man and his family, or a group of travellers, or a single animal carrying the seeds of life. Afterward, the survivors rebuild, guided by memory or by beings who carry knowledge from before the flood. It's easy to read these stories as symbolic, expressions of nature's cycles or human guilt. Yet they might also be memories, softened by centuries of retelling. The end of the last ice age brought floods on scales modern humanity can scarcely imagine. Sea levels rose by over 100 meters, drowning coastal plains and valleys, erasing settlements forever. To those who lived through it, the world truly ended, and the memory of that end would have been passed down in song and story, generation after generation, until it became myth. In Mesopotamia, long before the Bible, the Epic of Gilgamesh told of Utnapishtim, who survived a great flood sent by the gods. He built a boat, preserved life, and afterward was granted immortality. In Greece, the tale of Deucalion and Pyrrha follows the same pattern. In India, Manu is warned by a divine fish to build a vessel before the waters rise. In the Americas, the Hopi, the Maya, and the Aztec all speak of worlds destroyed by water and reborn under new suns. Even in the far north, among Arctic peoples, stories tell of ice melting and the land changing shape. The details differ, but the emotion is the same: awe, loss, and the fragile continuity of survival. If the first civilization truly existed, these myths could be its legacy, transmitted not through monuments but through memory. Each retelling would lose detail but preserve essence. Over time, the builders would become gods, their technology magic, their escape a miracle. The flood that destroyed them would become divine judgment rather than geological inevitability. We see this pattern even now in how modern myths are born, how historical events transform into legend within a few generations. It is human nature to fill gaps with meaning, to preserve significance even when facts fade. There's a theory in cognitive anthropology known as the mythic mind. It proposes that early humans encoded practical knowledge about weather, astronomy, agriculture, into stories that were easier to remember than data. A myth about a great serpent swallowing the sun might actually describe an eclipse cycle. A tale about gods angry with hunters could warn of overexploitation of resources. In this way, myths served as both history and instruction. If we read them carefully, these stories may contain more than moral lessons. They may contain memories of real events. When researchers began comparing flood myths globally, they found striking correlations between the timing of those stories and the end of the Pleistocene, roughly 12,000 years ago, when ice sheets melted and seas rose rapidly. Some oral traditions describe coastlines that now lie underwater, with uncanny accuracy. Aboriginal stories from Australia mention islands that once existed but were swallowed by the sea. When marine geologists mapped those regions, they found ancient shorelines exactly where the stories placed them. These traditions may be among the oldest accurate memories in existence, proving that oral culture can preserve truth across 10,000 years. If that is possible, then myth is not just story. It is storage. It is the human version of the frozen archive, flexible, self-repairing, passed from one living mind to another. Where ice preserves matter, myth preserves meaning. Both are vulnerable to time, but both endure through repetition. If the first civilization hid knowledge beneath the ice, they might also have hidden it in us, encoded in story, ritual, rhythm. We became their living memory without realizing it. Across the ancient world, certain symbols recur. Spirals, eyes, circles divided by lines, serpents coiled around themselves. They appear in petroglyphs, temples, textiles, and myths. The serpent especially is universal. It represents cycles, transformation, knowledge, and renewal. The Ouroboros, the snake eating its own tail, first appeared in Egyptian iconography, then spread to Greece, India, and beyond. It embodies the idea of continuity through destruction, of time devouring itself to begin again. It could also describe the planet's glacial rhythm, the endless freeze and thaw, the death and rebirth of worlds. Perhaps ancient people saw that pattern, lived through it, and shaped their stories around it. The same is true of the sky. Many ancient myths describe constellations that no longer match the modern heavens, as if they were drawn from older positions of stars. Precession, the slow wobble of Earth's axis, shifts the apparent location of constellations over millennia. By analysing these discrepancies, astronomers have dated some star myths to times long before recorded history. The myths, in effect, preserve astronomical data. They tell us what the night sky looked like tens of thousands of years ago. Such continuity suggests that the storytellers were not ignorant dreamers, but careful observers who encoded their science in narrative form. Even the architecture of myth has patterns. In almost every culture, the story begins with chaos and ends with order. Creation emerges from water or darkness, guided by a voice, a spark, or a builder. The builders shape the world, establish laws, teach knowledge, then retreat. The world declines, forgets, and must begin again. This is not just cosmology. It's a cycle of civilization itself. Perhaps the first civilization lived long enough to see their world collapse and understood that only story could survive. They may have designed myths as vessels, narrative arcs meant to carry ideas across the flood of time. We can trace their echoes in the symbols that still define human thought. The Tree of Life, for instance, appears in Sumer, Egypt, Scandinavia, Mesoamerica, and China. Its roots in the underworld, its branches in the heavens, its trunk in the human realm. It's a perfect map of the cosmos and of consciousness. It may have originated as a mnemonic device, a way to teach interconnectedness. Over millennia, it became sacred, its meaning layered and abstract. But at its core lies a simple truth, that everything is connected and that life depends on balance. If such a principle formed the foundation of a forgotten civilization, we are still living by it without knowing the source. The great myths also contain warnings. They tell of pride, of hubris, of forgetting the old ways. In nearly every flood story, the catastrophe follows human excess. The people grow arrogant, defy nature, and the gods send destruction. We tend to interpret these as moral tales, but they could also be historical. Perhaps ancient societies saw others fall to environmental collapse and preserved the lesson as divine retribution. If so, myth becomes not superstition but survival strategy, a way to remember the consequences of imbalance. Even now, when we read these stories, we respond to them instinctively. They feel true in a way that data does not. That's because they speak to something deeper than intellect, to the emotional memory of the species. Our ancestors carried their knowledge in symbols because symbols survive translation. A drawing of a flood, a serpent, a fire in the sky. These can be understood even when languages change. The builders of old, if they existed, may have known that the surest form of preservation was not material but symbolic. They built their legacy in the human psyche. There are places on Earth where these echoes seem louder, where myth and landscape overlap so perfectly that it feels intentional. In the Andes, legends tell of a shining city that sank beneath a lake, leaving behind golden ruins. In the Indian Ocean, Tamil poets wrote of Lemuria, a lost land swallowed by the sea. In the Pacific, Polynesian navigators speak of islands that appear and vanish. In each case, myth describes geography altered by ice, fire, or flood. The physical and the mythical converge, blurring the boundary between history and imagination. When modern explorers visit such sites, they often find traces of real change. Submerged terraces, ancient shorelines, ruins half buried in sediment. The line between legend and evidence grows thin. This doesn't prove the existence of a single lost civilization, but it does prove that memory, even mythic memory, is grounded in experience. Stories persist because they encode something vital, something the species must not forget. Myth also shapes identity. Cultures define themselves by the stories they tell about origin and purpose. The forgotten builders may have understood this and used it deliberately. To ensure their wisdom endured, they might have woven it into creation stories, knowing that every future generation would retell them. The act of storytelling itself would keep the memory alive, even if the details faded. Over time, the builders would become gods, their instructions ritual, their memory eternal. It's possible that the myths we call religion are simply the echo of their last message, transformed by time into worship. There is an ancient Egyptian inscription that reads, "To speak the name of the dead is to make them live again." That may be the truest description of myth. Every time we tell these stories, we resurrect something older than ourselves. The builders may be gone, their cities buried, their machines forgotten, but their names, disguised as gods or heroes, still travel through our language. When we speak of Prometheus bringing fire, of Quetzalcoatl teaching science, of Thoth recording knowledge, we may be invoking their shadows. Even in science, myth lingers. The names of planets, constellations, and spacecraft come from old stories. Our telescopes and equations are modern tools, yet we still look to the heavens through the same archetypes. The myths have become metaphors, but their function remains: to connect us to something larger than ourselves, to remind us that we are part of a continuum of curiosity. If the builders hid their wisdom in myth, they succeeded perfectly. Their ideas have survived not as doctrine but as inspiration. The deeper question is whether we can still hear the meaning beneath the metaphor. Myths were never meant to be taken literally. They were meant to be felt. They speak in symbols because symbols bypass the barriers of time and culture. They remind us of the patterns that govern existence: rise and fall, creation and decay, knowledge and loss. In those patterns, we see ourselves and everything that came before. As we rediscover the old myths in the light of science, the boundaries between legend and history blur further. The flood becomes climate change. The serpent becomes DNA. The tree of life becomes ecology. The gods become civilizations long forgotten. What we call progress may simply be translation. The same truths expressed in a new language. When the wind moves over the thawing ice and the air carries the scent of salt and old dust, it feels as though those stories are being told again, this time by the planet itself. The floods, the fires, the transformations, they're all repeating. The myths warned us not to forget, and yet we did. Now the cycle returns, not as punishment, but as memory. The echoes are becoming voices again, reminding us that history is not a line but a spiral. Somewhere beneath the remaining glaciers, perhaps there are still fragments of the builder's world. A tool, a carving, a mark. But perhaps the truer discovery lies not in objects but in recognition. We have always carried them within us, in the stories we tell when the night is long and the world feels vast and mysterious. Their memory is alive in our words, our symbols, our dreams, and as the ice melts and the air grows warm, those echoes rise once more, not as distant myths, but as living memory returning to its source. The builders are not gone. They are in every story told around a fire, every symbol carved into stone, every question we ask about where we came from. They have always been here, speaking through myth, waiting for us to listen. There's something uniquely human about the act of drawing a map. To trace the world on paper, to flatten vastness into shape, is to declare that the unknown can be known. A map is a promise that the world has order, that distance and direction can be understood, that there's a pattern beneath the confusion of terrain. But what happens when a map describes something that should be impossible? Coastlines that shouldn't exist, mountains drawn centuries before they were discovered, or lands placed with uncanny accuracy under ice that no human of that era could have seen. Those maps exist. They sit quietly in archives and libraries, copied and recopied by hands that belong to people who could not have known the full meaning of what they were reproducing. They're fragments of cartography from the 15th and 16th centuries, long before modern exploration reached the poles. Most were compiled by navigators who gathered older sources, charts, oral traditions, and the knowledge of traders from forgotten cultures. Their makers didn't claim divine insight. They drew what they thought was known. And yet some of these maps show details that defy explanation. The most famous of them is the Piri Reis map, drawn in 1513 by an Ottoman admiral and cartographer. It depicts the western coast of Africa, the eastern coast of South America, and a landmass at the bottom, a land that looks remarkably like Antarctica. What makes it stranger is that the coastline it shows is free of ice, resembling what modern radar imaging later revealed beneath the Antarctic ice sheet. In 1959, after these radar maps were compared with Piri Reis's chart, some historians and geographers were unsettled by the resemblance. How could a 16th century sailor have drawn a map of a continent not discovered until 1820, and more importantly of its subglacial terrain, something that would remain hidden under kilometres of ice? The explanations range from cautious to wild. The cautious ones say that what looks like Antarctica is really an exaggerated southern extension of South America. The others suggest that the map maker had access to ancient sources, perhaps charts from a seafaring civilization that existed before the last ice age, when the Antarctic coast was indeed ice-free. Such claims are impossible to verify, yet they persist because they fit too neatly into a larger mystery. They suggest continuity, a passing of information across epochs, through hands long turned to dust. The Piri Reis map is not alone. The Orontius Phineus map of 1531 shows Antarctica's general shape as well, with mountain ranges and rivers corresponding roughly to modern topography. The Boache map of 1737 divides the continent into two land masses separated by a strait, something geophysicists later confirmed when radar penetrated the ice, and revealed that Antarctica indeed consists of two main regions. Each of these maps, examined in isolation, could be dismissed as coincidence. Together, they form a pattern that invites wonder. Cartographers of the Renaissance were known to collect and compile older maps, some said to date from the libraries of Alexandria or from lost ports of the ancient world. The Mediterranean, for thousands of years, was a crossroads of information where Greek, Egyptian, Phoenician, and Arabic knowledge mingled. It's conceivable that fragments of even older cartography survived, copied without context until their origins were forgotten. The question is, who made the originals, and how? For a civilization to have mapped Antarctica without ice, it would have had to exist more than 12,000 years ago before the last glacial maximum. That's twice as old as the earliest known cities, older than agriculture, older even than the oldest surviving myths. No archaeological record supports such a society. And yet the accuracy of those maps keeps the question alive. Could humans, or some branch of them, have reached a level of exploration we no longer remember? The idea sounds like fantasy, but geography itself hints at earlier maritime abilities than we once believed. Evidence of seafaring appears throughout prehistory. Obsidian tools traded between islands separated by deep water, animal remains transported across seas. 10,000 years ago, people were already navigating in the Pacific, the Mediterranean, and the Indian Ocean. They built boats capable of long voyages, guided by stars, winds, and currents. They mapped without paper, carrying geography in memory and story. It's not impossible that some of that knowledge could have survived, passed down through oral tradition until it found its way into the hands of later mapmakers. If that's true, then the maps of the impossible might not be impossible at all. They might be echoes, distortions of a long chain of transmission, reaching back to the first navigators, the first observers who dared to record what they saw. Over centuries, their charts would have been copied, simplified, merged with others, until their true age was disguised by the layers of revision. The Piri Reis map itself contains notes claiming that it was compiled from 20 older maps, some dating back to the time of Alexander. Perhaps Alexander's geographers inherited their sources too. The trail leads backward into a fog of forgotten history, where memory and evidence blur. Still, the resemblance between those maps and modern images of Antarctica remains unsettling. When radar finally revealed the mountains buried under the ice, the match was close enough to draw attention. Could this be mere coincidence, a trick of projection and imagination? Most likely. Yet coincidence doesn't erase curiosity, it only fuels it. The fascination with these maps reveals something deeper about human perception. We are drawn to patterns that hint at continuity, at the survival of knowledge through catastrophe. If the Earth has destroyed civilizations before, then the thought that something endured, a scrap of a map, a hint of geometry, becomes comforting. It tells us that intelligence is resilient, that memory finds a way. Whether or not those maps truly depict an ice-free Antarctica, they symbolize the persistence of human curiosity through the ages. Modern science has its own kind of map-making now, far more abstract and precise. Satellites orbiting Earth create digital reconstructions of terrain, climate, and ocean currents. We map not just the surface but the invisible: gravity, magnetism, radiation. These maps too contain mysteries, anomalies that defy our understanding. Some are natural phenomena, others signals we haven't yet learned to interpret. In a sense, we are still the same species, charting the unknown, trying to fit the infinite into lines and coordinates. The act of mapping is more than navigation. It's an assertion that the universe can be translated into understanding. The builders of the first civilization, if they existed, might have seen it the same way. They would have mapped not just land and sea, but the forces that bind them: magnetic fields, ley lines, currents of energy that we now study as geophysics. Many ancient monuments are aligned with extraordinary precision to the cardinal directions, to solstices, to lunar cycles. Such alignments suggest not mere architecture but cartography, the mapping of heaven onto earth. The same impulse that drives explorers to chart continents may have driven priests and astronomers to chart the sky. In the ancient world, to map was to connect. Egyptian temples aligned with Sirius, the dog star, marking the Nile's flood. The Mayan calendar tracked Venus and Jupiter with mathematical accuracy. The builders of Stonehenge and Nabta Playa knew the movement of the solstice sun. These were maps written in stone, not of geography but of time itself. To them, the heavens and the earth were one system, reflecting each other. If the first civilization existed, it might have united both forms of mapping, spatial and celestial, into a single understanding. Their maps, if ever found, might describe not where they lived, but how everything lived together. When we look at the strange accuracy of certain old charts, we forget how advanced ancient observation could be. Without satellites, early navigators used the stars, the tilt of the horizon, and the behaviour of waves. Polynesian sailors could detect islands beyond the visible horizon by reading the interference patterns of swells. They felt direction in their bones, literally, lying flat on the deck to sense the rhythm of waves through their bodies. To call them primitive is to misunderstand mastery. A civilization that lived for millennia on the edge of ice and ocean might have learned to read the planet in ways we've forgotten. Perhaps the map makers of the impossible were not men with compasses and ink, but whole cultures attuned to the memory of the Earth. Their maps were not drawn but lived, encoded in star paths, in oral chants, in sacred geometry. Later generations, inheriting fragments of their knowledge, may have reduced those living systems into lines on parchment, losing the context but preserving the form. That's why their maps seem so strange. They are translations of a language we no longer speak. The deeper question, though, is not how they drew the maps, but what those maps were meant to convey. If they truly contained knowledge from before the last great freeze, they might have been more than guides for navigation. They might have been records of warning, depictions of coastlines before the flood, reminders of where the sea would rise, notes on how to find high ground when the world changed again. It's possible that our ancestors carried such charts not to explore, but to survive. Some myths hint at this. In the aftermath of global floods, cultures speak of the ones who knew, who guided survivors to safety using ancient maps or star knowledge. The Dogon of Mali, for example, described teachers from the sky who brought them cosmological understanding. The Hopi talk of migrations guided by stone tablets and celestial signs. The Polynesians tell of navigators who knew the world long before others dared to sail it. Across these stories the theme repeats, a remnant of knowledge preserved through catastrophe, carried by map makers who remembered what others forgot. In that sense, the maps of the impossible might not just depict land, they might depict continuity itself. Each line on parchment could be an echo of an older memory, drawn not to claim territory but to hold on to belonging. To draw a coastline is to say, we were here. To draw a star path is to say, we knew where we were going. The map becomes a bridge between disappearance and persistence, between the lost and the living. In modern science, maps have become tools of revelation once again. Through radar and satellite imaging, we've begun to uncover the hidden topography of Antarctica, its valleys, mountains and rivers sealed under ice. What we see there is hauntingly familiar to those old charts. Not exact, but suggestive. The Peri-Reis and Orontius Phineus maps might have been accidental glimpses of that reality, distorted through time, or perhaps they were deliberate attempts to record knowledge already ancient when the ice first came. Either way, they remind us that mapping is an act of memory as much as measurement. The irony is that as we make better maps than ever before, the unknown grows, not shrinks. Each discovery reveals deeper layers of complexity, subglacial ecosystems, buried lakes, unexplained magnetic anomalies. The continent once thought empty is proving to be full of mystery. The more we map, the more we realise that the impossible has never been a fixed boundary. It's a moving horizon. If the first civilization did leave behind their wisdom, perhaps they left it in the form of a map so vast that we've mistaken it for the planet itself. Maybe the ice, the seas, the mountains and the stars are all parts of one grand design. Coordinates in a cosmic chart we're only beginning to read. Each discovery, each connection might be another point on that invisible grid. The forgotten builders could have known that any species clever enough to understand mapping would one day find those patterns and wonder, just as we do now. There's an old saying among explorers, a map is not the territory. It's true, but sometimes the map is the only way to glimpse what the territory used to be. Those fragments of impossible cartography, however flawed, might be our only surviving windows into a world erased by ice and time. Whether drawn by ancient hands or imagined by later ones, they are proof of humanity's refusal to accept mystery as final. Every line on those maps says the same thing. look closer, and so we do. We measure, we compare, we debate, and we dream. We trace the coasts that no longer exist, the rivers that flow under glaciers, the mountains hidden beneath white silence. In every line we see the persistence of memory. The map makers of the impossible might never have meant to be immortal, but they are. Their work endures, a puzzle written across centuries, calling us to remember that even in a world of vanishing truths, imagination is still our greatest instrument of discovery. Time, for all its familiarity, is the most difficult thing to measure. We live within it, shaped by it, carried by its current, and yet the more closely we try to hold it, the less it resembles what we think it is. In science, time is treated as a dimension, a quantity that can be measured and modelled, yet even those measurements are translations, simplifications of something far stranger. When we speak of forgotten time, we're really speaking about the limits of our own perception, the vast stretches of existence that move too slowly or too subtly for us to notice. The Earth, after all, is billions of years old. Humanity has existed for a fraction of that. What we call ancient might be recent in the planet's memory. What we call forgotten might still echo in the fabric of reality itself. The study of time once belonged to priests and philosophers. They measured it by stars and shadows, by the rhythms of the body, by the cycles of the moon. Later came clocks, pendulums and atomic vibrations, instruments that refined our sense of precision but perhaps dulled our sense of wonder. We began to think of time as linear, constant, an arrow moving forward from a single origin. But nature rarely moves in straight lines. It coils, it oscillates, it repeats. The ice ages come and go like tides. The magnetic poles drift and reverse. Species vanish and reappear in altered forms. Even the continents travel, colliding and separating in slow dances across epochs. Time in nature is not a line. It's a pattern, a heartbeat, a spiral, a rhythm that continues long after the participants are gone. In that sense, science and myth describe the same truth in different languages. The myths speak of ages, golden, silver, bronze and dark, cycles of rise and fall. Science speaks of geological eras and climatic phases. Both describe repetition, the eternal return. What makes science distinct is its method, not its scope. It measures what myth intuits. But there are places where the two seem to overlap, where the data itself hints at memory older than humanity's recollection, as though the planet remembers more than we realise. Ice cores, sediments, and tree rings give us timelines of the Earth's climate. They tell of catastrophes long forgotten by any living species, supervolcanoes, asteroid impacts, magnetic shifts, solar storms. Some of these events coincide eerily with legends of fire and flood, of sudden darkness, of gods descending or vanishing. It's tempting to see myth as interpretation of these natural events, a human attempt to make sense of what the sky and ground were doing. But sometimes the match is too precise to ignore. The eruption of Thor around 1600 BCE, for example, destroyed much of the Minoan civilization and darkened the skies over the Mediterranean. Some scholars believe it inspired the story of Atlantis, a powerful culture lost to the sea. Whether or not that's true, it shows how memory transforms into myth, and myth into cautionary tale. The science of forgotten time begins with such alignments. It asks where our stories meet the evidence. Beneath the glaciers, in sediments and ice, scientists have found traces of rapid warming and cooling events that occurred thousands of years apart, as though the planet itself flickered between states. These transitions, known as Dansgaard-Oeschger events, happened during the last ice age. Temperatures in the northern hemisphere rose by as much as 8 degrees Celsius in a matter of decades, then stabilised, then fell again. No one fully understands why. Some think it was the collapse of ocean currents. Others, a shift in solar radiation or volcanic activity. Whatever the cause, these oscillations would have been apocalyptic to the people alive then. Ice would have melted suddenly. Floods would have swept across plains. Forests and deserts would have exchanged places. If humans witnessed this, and the timing suggests they did, it would have seared itself into memory. And when that memory faded, it would have become myth. We can trace these pulses of forgotten time not only in ice, but in the Earth's magnetic record. Deep within the crust, iron-bearing minerals align with the planet's magnetic field as they form. When that field reverses, the orientation of those minerals flips. In this way, rocks become a record of polarity, a barcode of reversal stretching back millions of years. Every reversal marks a moment when the compass of Earth itself pointed in the opposite direction. The last full reversal occurred about 780,000 years ago, but smaller fluctuations have happened since. These events might have altered the atmosphere, disrupted radiation shielding, and affected climate. To ancient observers, the consequences would have seemed supernatural. Skies glowing in strange colours, animals disoriented, the seasons shifting unpredictably. Perhaps this too became part of our mythic inheritance, the memory of a world turning upside down. Geologists and physicists reconstruct these events with precision instruments, yet their work often feels like archaeology of the invisible. They measure isotopes, magnetism, and radiation to piece together a story written in matter. Each discovery pushes the boundaries of what we know about time, revealing that our perception of stability is just an illusion created by short lifespans. The Earth is never still. Mountains rise and crumble in cycles. Oceans form and vanish. The continents themselves drift centimetres each year, slow to us, but at the scale of millions of years they flow like liquid. What we call ancient ruins may, in another age, be ground into sediment, transformed into stone, and uplifted into mountains again. Every trace of civilization is temporary, but the materials of its making persist, waiting to be read by whatever consciousness follows ours. In recent years, scientists studying Antarctica's subglacial bedrock have found traces of ancient forest buried under kilometres of ice. In some samples, fossilised roots and pollen reveal that the continent was once lush and temperate. The age of these remains, around 90 million years, reminds us that even the coldest places were once green. The Earth remembers every transformation. If ice can hold air from the time of our ancestors, rock can hold the memory of entire worlds that came before humanity existed. The science of forgotten time is not just the study of the past, it's the recognition that time itself is layered, and that we are living in one thin stratum of an immense archive. Even the stars preserve forgotten epochs. Light from distant galaxies travels for billions of years before reaching our eyes. When we look at the night sky, we are not seeing the present but the past, photons that left their source before our species evolved. The cosmos itself is a time machine. Radio telescopes capture signals that have crossed unimaginable distances, carrying the history of creation encoded in faint static. Cosmic background radiation, the faint afterglow of the Big Bang, is the oldest light we can observe. A whisper from 13.8 billion years ago still humming softly in every direction. In that radiation lies the record of the universe's first moments, its earliest fluctuations, its first structures. Time at that scale becomes space, memory becomes geometry. When we study such phenomena, we are participating in the same impulse that drove the first astronomers, the first builders of calendars and monuments. We are trying to situate ourselves in the great unfolding of existence. Yet the deeper we peer, the more we find traces that don't fit, anomalies that suggest our timeline of civilization might not be complete. Artifacts out of place or out of time occasionally surface. Tools embedded in strata older than humanity. Stones shaped too precisely to be natural. Hints of technology beyond what we expect from the context. Most are explained as coincidence or contamination, but a few remain unresolved. They linger in the margins of science, reminders that history is not a closed system. Sometimes forgotten time hides in plain sight. We live surrounded by remnants of earlier epochs, often without realizing it. The oxygen we breathe was forged in stars that died long before Earth existed. The calcium in our bones was once part of ancient seas. Even our DNA carries echoes of extinct ancestors, Neanderthals, Denisovans, and perhaps others we haven't yet identified. Every cell in our bodies is a palimpsest, a rewriting of life's ancient script. When scientists sequence genomes, they're reading the story of evolution, not a story of progress, but of memory adapting itself through change. We are walking archives, built from forgotten time. This perspective changes how we think about civilization. If the first builders did exist, their disappearance would not mean annihilation. It would mean transformation. Their atoms would become part of ours. Their ideas, filtered through myth and inheritance, would persist as intuition, as instinct. Knowledge does not always survive in books or machines. Sometimes it survives as potential, waiting for the right conditions to re-emerge. Evolution itself might be a form of remembering, the universe experimenting until it recalls what worked before. In the modern world, we measure time in ways the ancients could never have imagined, through radioactive decay, through cosmic expansion, through atomic oscillation. These measurements allow us to see farther back than myth, to reconstruct the sequence of events that shaped our world. Yet even with all this precision, the most profound aspects of time remain mysterious. Why does it move forward? Why does it seem to flow at all? In physics, time may not even exist as we experience it. It could be an emergent property of entropy, a byproduct of change rather than a fundamental reality. In that view, what we call the past and future are simply different configurations of the same underlying system. This challenges everything we think we know about history. If time is not a line but landscape, then the past may not be gone. It may coexist with us in a different dimension, accessible only through certain alignments of matter and consciousness. The ancient builders, if they understood this, might have encoded their knowledge not in durable structures, but in resonance, patterns that align with the natural frequencies of the planet. Perhaps their monuments, now eroded or buried, were not just physical, but temporal instruments designed to interact with time itself. Some researchers studying sacred geometry in ancient sites have noticed that many alignments correspond to astronomical cycles that repeat over vast periods: precession, lunar nodal shifts, solar maxima. These cycles are so long that no single generation could have discovered them without inherited data. To track them, observation must persist across thousands of years. That persistence implies an unbroken chain of attention, a civilization devoted to watching the sky, measuring change and understanding recurrence. Such commitment is a kind of science, one rooted not in machinery, but in continuity. If we accept that science is the pursuit of patterns, then the ancients were scientists in their own right. They lacked instruments, but they had patience, and patience is the first tool of discovery. Their knowledge may have been qualitative rather than quantitative, but it was no less profound. They studied the behaviour of stars, tides and seasons. They understood cycles of fertility and decay. They lived close to the rhythms we now study through satellites and equations. Their memory of time was experiential, embodied. They didn't need to remember dates. They remembered patterns. In our era, we are rediscovering those patterns through technology, often without realizing we are tracing the same shapes. Climate models echo ancient calendars. The Fibonacci sequence appears in both plant growth and computer algorithms. The geometry of galaxies mirrors the geometry of shells. The universe keeps repeating itself, and we keep rediscovering it. The science of forgotten time is not about lost civilizations alone. It's about recognizing that knowledge itself is cyclical. Each age rediscovers the same truths in new languages. When archaeologists unearth something enigmatic, an alignment, an artifact, an inscription, they ask what purpose it served. Perhaps the real question is what it remembered. Every creation, whether a temple or a tool, encodes a moment of understanding. The pyramids, the megaliths, the carvings in ice and stone, all of them are attempts to hold onto a piece of time. They are expressions of memory materialized. Even if their original purpose is lost, the act of creation itself becomes a record. Modern science often speaks in data and probabilities, but beneath its precision lies the same yearning that drove the builders of the past, the desire to outlast forgetting, to know not just what is, but what has been and what might be again. In that sense, science and myth are companions, both reaching toward the same horizon from different directions. One measures, the other remembers. Together they form the map of human curiosity stretching across forgotten time. As our instruments grow more powerful, we begin to glimpse the scale of our ignorance. The more we learn, the larger the unknown becomes. Yet that is not a failure. It is continuity. Each discovery folds us deeper into the story of the cosmos. The forgotten time is never truly lost. It is only waiting for attention to return. Like the ice that melts and reforms, like the stars that die and are born again, knowledge cycles endlessly. We are simply one phase in that eternal rhythm. And somewhere beneath the glaciers, in the slow breathing of the earth, the science of forgotten time continues. The ice records, the rocks remember, the sky reflects. We listen, measure, interpret, and in doing so, we become part of the same process. The universe remembering itself through us, through thought, through wonder, through the fragile persistence of curiosity that has never quite learned how to forget. When the ice finally releases its hold, the world that emerges will not be the same one that froze beneath it. The thaw will reveal what the cold has kept hidden for ages, not just landscapes, but possibilities, questions, remnants of everything that came before. To imagine what we might find when the ice lets go is to imagine memory waking up. The planet is not dead matter. It's a living system with a long attention span, and its frozen places are where that attention slows almost to stillness. When the stillness breaks, everything that has slept begins to stir. Already, fragments of the past are surfacing in the melt. Bones of mammoths, perfectly preserved, their tusks pale and smooth as ivory. Moss and seeds that sprout when touched by warmth. Pollen from ancient forests drifting into the wind as if no time had passed. Scientists have found viruses frozen for tens of thousands of years that can still infect cells, proving that even the smallest forms of life can wait beyond imagination. Each discovery is both miracle and warning. The ice is not a grave, it is a vault. And when the vault opens, what comes out is not always gentle. It's easy to think of these findings as mere curiosities, but they are fragments of a vast unfolding narrative. The glaciers that have begun to retreat are uncovering soils that haven't felt air or light since before human civilization existed. Beneath them, microbes that evolved under pressure and darkness emerge into sunlight, their chemical reactions releasing gases unseen in our current atmosphere. Permafrost that once held the remains of plants and animals is thawing, releasing carbon that had been trapped for millennia. In these processes, the past literally enters the present. The air we breathe now includes molecules from ages long forgotten, the exhalation of frozen time. But it's not only biology that might awaken. The landscape itself could reveal stories far older than any living memory. Beneath Antarctica, satellites have already mapped vast mountain ranges, river systems and valleys that stretch for hundreds of miles. One such region, the Gambutsev Mountains, lies buried under more than 2 miles of ice. Their peaks are as tall as the Alps, yet no human eye has ever seen them. The mountains are shrouded in total darkness, sealed in a world of pressure and silence. When the ice eventually recedes, whether through natural cycles or human-induced warming, those hidden ranges will rise again into the open air. It will be as if a new continent has been discovered. though in truth it will be the oldest one of all. In those valleys could lie sediments untouched since before the first mammals walked the earth. They might hold fossils of creatures that adapted to ancient climates, entire ecosystems preserved in mineral form. Beneath the frozen lakes, DNA from extinct species could rest, waiting to be sequenced by curious hands. Each of these finds will expand the boundaries of biology and history alike, blurring the line between past and present. Yet there's another deeper question. What if the ice conceals not only nature's memory but something of our own making? Something left behind by minds not so different from ours? That question, though speculative, refuses to fade. The idea that an earlier civilization might have hidden its knowledge beneath the polar ice has persisted through centuries of imagination and research. If such a civilization existed during a warm age before the last glaciation, its settlements would now lie beneath thousands of feet of ice. Conventional archaeology can't reach those depths. Drilling is expensive, dangerous, and often destructive. But satellite scans sometimes reveal anomalies, symmetrical ridges, geometric depressions, patterns that do not resemble natural formations. Most are easily explained as volcanic structures or glacial folds, yet some remain ambiguous. They spark curiosity precisely because they seem both familiar and alien, as though the planet itself had once been sculpted by intention. If the ice hides the ruins of any advanced culture, their discovery would change everything we know about human history. But even short of that, what we find as the ice retreats is no less astonishing. In Greenland, scientists have discovered entire landscapes of buried rivers and forests. Beneath one glacier, they found soil that still contained organic material, leaves, roots, and pollen that suggest a lush environment only a few million years ago. These discoveries rewrite our understanding of how fast climate can change. They also remind us that no environment, no matter how permanent it seems, lasts forever. What might we find when the last layers melt away completely? The answer depends on how far we're willing to look. If we limit ourselves to fossils and rocks, we'll find the history of life. If we include the traces of lost cultures, we might uncover humanity's own preface, a time before history began recording itself. But if we expand our perspective to include everything the ice has recorded, the chemistry of air, the vibration of sound, the alignment of molecules, then the possibilities multiply beyond imagination. The ice could contain information in forms we don't yet know how to read. Consider how much data is already hidden in the frozen world. Each layer of ice records not only the atmosphere of its time, but its electromagnetic environment, its mineral dust, its microscopic life. The deeper the layer, the older the information. In that sense, drilling an ice core is like opening a time capsule, one that stretches back nearly 1 million years. Now imagine what happens when that core is not drilled, but melted naturally. All that data disperses into the ocean, into clouds, into weather. It's like an enormous hard drive slowly erasing itself while transferring its contents into the global system. The knowledge isn't lost, it's redistributed. The planet reads itself again. There's also the question of artifacts. Some believe that objects of human or even pre-human origin might be buried under glacial layers, not because of fantasy, but because of geological logic. Ice advances and retreats in cycles. Each cycle buries whatever lies beneath, and then, thousands of years later, exposes it again. We've already found evidence of human presence in regions once thought uninhabitable. Tools, carvings, and even footprints preserved in permafrost. It's conceivable that deeper layers might conceal more complex remains, perhaps from cultures erased by earlier climate shifts. Whether those cultures were as advanced as ours or entirely different in nature, their rediscovery would force us to confront the true depth of our past. But the greatest revelations may not be material at all. They may come from what we learn about the resilience of life. As ice recedes, it exposes microbial ecosystems that have evolved in total isolation for millions of years. Some of these organisms thrive on chemical energy, not sunlight, feeding on minerals and gases in the dark. Their existence expands the definition of habitability. If life can survive under miles of ice, it can likely survive on other frozen worlds, Europa, Enceladus, even Mars. The thawing of Earth's poles might offer a preview of discoveries waiting beneath the icy crusts of other planets. Our own planet becomes a laboratory for cosmic biology. There's a paradox in these discoveries, one that mirrors the paradox of knowledge itself. To find what the ice conceals, we must destroy the very thing that preserved it. The act of revelation is also the act of loss. Scientists who work on melting glaciers often describe a sense of mourning mixed with wonder. Each sample they collect is precious, but it's also evidence of something vanishing. They're archivists of disappearance, racing against time to save fragments of a world that can't be restored. Still, curiosity persists. It has always been our species' defining trait. Even as the consequences of our actions become clearer, we continue to look, to measure, to imagine. Perhaps that's what connects us most deeply to whatever came before, the refusal to stop asking what lies beyond the horizon. When the ice lets go, it will answer that question in ways we can't yet predict. Some answers may comfort us, others may unsettle us completely, but all of them will remind us that the world is not static, that it remembers and changes in equal measure. It's possible that we'll find things that redefine not just history but identity. Imagine discovering evidence of a civilization older than our own, preserved in fragments beneath Antarctic ice, symbols carved into stone, patterns etched into metal, or structures aligned with celestial geometry. Such a discovery would not simply add a new chapter to history, it would rewrite the entire book. It would force us to rethink what it means to be human, what it means to progress, and whether progress is even linear at all. The builders of that civilization, if they existed, might not have vanished. They might have become us, carrying fragments of their memory forward through genes, instincts, or intuition. If that sounds like speculation, it's worth remembering that the story of humanity is already full of rediscoveries. We found cave art 30,000 years old that uses perspective and shading techniques once thought modern. We've uncovered ancient engineering that defies our assumptions of primitive technology. We've deciphered languages forgotten for millennia, proving that even silence can be temporary. The ice, then, is simply the next veil to lift. When it does, the revelations will not be limited to science. They will touch art, philosophy, and faith. Every discovery about the past reshapes how we see ourselves in the present. The melting of the ice is not just an environmental event, it's an existential one. It challenges our illusion of permanence and control. It reminds us that everything we build, cities, nations, ideas, rests on foundations that shift beneath us. And yet, within that instability, there's continuity. The same curiosity that built pyramids and telescopes drives us still. Perhaps what we will truly find when the ice lets go is not ancient machines or forgotten cities, but a reflection of our own impermanence, proof that knowledge must evolve to survive. The ice teaches by example. It stores, it releases, it transforms. It doesn't cling to its contents forever. It understands that preservation is temporary, that memory must move to remain alive. As the thaw accelerates, new frontiers of exploration open. Autonomous submarines dive beneath the ice shelves to map hidden seas. Drones scan glaciers for signs of ancient lakes and buried terrain. Supercomputers reconstruct climates long gone, revealing how the planet once breathed. Each innovation brings us closer to seeing the Earth as it truly is, not a fixed stage, but a living record in motion. In that movement lies both danger and beauty. The rise of seas, the shifting of currents, the loss of ice. These are the symptoms of change, but also the expression of the planet's deeper rhythm. We're witnessing one of its transformations in real time. It may bring loss, but it also brings awareness. For the first time, a species is observing the memory of its own world unfold before its eyes. When the ice finally disappears, whether in centuries or millennia, what remains will not just be land and water, it will be understanding. We will see the contours of continents that have slept since before our kind had names for them. We will hold fossils that rewrite ancestry, touch stones that once stood in sunlight millions of years ago. We will confront the long continuity of existence and realize that nothing ever truly begins or ends. It only changes form, and perhaps, when that moment comes, we'll feel a quiet sense of recognition. Not shock, not triumph, but familiarity. Because deep down, we've always known that the Earth remembers more than we do. When the ice lets go, it won't just show us the past, it will show us ourselves, reflected in the patterns of survival, curiosity and renewal that have always defined life on this planet. The truth beneath the ice has waited patiently. It will emerge not as revelation, but as reminder that everything we seek has always been here, resting in the cold, waiting for the warmth of understanding to bring it back into the light. When the wind moves across the newly exposed ground where ice has withdrawn, it carries a strange scent. Part salt, part mineral, part something that feels like age itself. It is the breath of the old world, rising slowly from the surface of a planet that is remembering itself. The ice that once sealed away its stories begins to release them into the air, invisible but everywhere. Molecules of forgotten atmospheres, the quiet exhalation of epochs that no living creature has ever breathed. To stand there, on that shifting threshold between cold and warmth, is to feel the boundary between past and present dissolve. That air is ancient. Each gust contains the remnants of climates that predate humanity, fragments of oxygen from forests that no longer exist, carbon from long-extinct volcanoes, and traces of dust that once fell through skies no one has seen. The Earth keeps these things in circulation like pages from a book that's constantly being rewritten, and yet even as the pages change, the story endures. The breath of the old world is not nostalgia, it's continuity. It's the planet reminding us that nothing truly disappears. It only transforms into something else. As the last great fields of ice recede, the world that emerges feels both new and impossibly old. Rocks polished by glaciers glint under the sun for the first time in 10,000 years. Riverbeds resume their flow where frozen channels once lay silent. Seeds long buried germinate and send up pale shoots into the thawing air. The land is not empty, it's awakening. And with it comes a sense of recognition, a realization that life has always been waiting for another chance, another cycle, another breath. This moment, for those who study the planet, feels like standing inside a memory made visible. The ice has acted as a barrier between worlds, sealing away the last traces of the Pleistocene, that long chapter when humans were few and the Earth was ruled by cold. As it melts, we're effectively travelling back in time. Every metre of retreat exposes older soil, older air, older sunlight refracted through different skies. In the scent of melting permafrost, scientists detect methane and carbon compounds from the ancient biosphere. In the colour of sediment, they read the transitions between ice ages and interglacials. And in the water itself, they find chemical fingerprints that tell them how the planet once breathed, how it inhaled carbon through forests and oceans, and how it exhaled through volcanoes and decay. To call it breath is not poetic exaggeration. The Earth does breathe, though in cycles far longer than any human life. Carbon, oxygen, nitrogen, all flow through living systems circulating between air, land, and sea. The ice ages were part of that respiration, the planet's slow inhalation of cold and exhalation of warmth. We happen to exist in one of the warm breaths now, and that breath is deepening, quickening, as though the Earth itself is sighing after a long slumber. In that sigh, there's both release and warning. The gases escaping from thawing permafrost and melting glaciers are not inert. They influence climate, accelerating the very process that set them free. Methane, carbon dioxide, and water vapour amplify warmth, feeding the loop. The Earth's breath becomes fevered, and the balance that sustained the Holocene, the brief, stable period during which all known civilization arose, begins to shift. The old world is not simply returning, it is merging with the new, creating conditions unseen for millions of years. But to understand what that means, we have to see beyond crisis and look toward perspective. The planet has experienced many transformations before, hot and cold, barren and lush, violent and calm. Each era destroyed some forms of life and gave rise to others. The Earth's resilience is not gentle, but it is absolute. What feels like catastrophe to us is continuity to it. The breath of the old world carries that truth. It whispers that adaptation, not permanence, is the law of survival. As we stand on the edge of these changes, there's a temptation to see the melting ice as pure loss, the disappearance of landscapes, species, and stability. And yet, in another sense, it's revelation. The glaciers are retreating not into nothing, but into history. They are revealing what came before, layer by layer. Each meltwater stream carries the dust of ancient plains, each particle of silt a record of mountains long vanished. Even the air above them becomes a time machine. The carbon dioxide now circulating in the atmosphere contains atoms once exhaled by creatures from another age, now breathing again through us. The cycle is complete. The old world doesn't just return through matter, it returns through sound. As the ice cracks, it produces low-frequency vibrations that travel for miles through rock and water. These deep, resonant tones resemble the infrasonic waves used by whales to navigate across oceans. Some researchers record them and convert them into audible frequencies, revealing an eerie, rhythmic pulse, the sound of glaciers dying and the Earth reshaping itself. To listen to those recordings is to hear the breath of the planet amplified, ancient and vast, both tragic and alive. It is possible that our ancestors, or even the so-called forgotten builders, once heard that same sound. Perhaps they lived in an age of Thor too, a time when the ice withdrew and the world was remade. Their myths of floods and rebirth may come from that very experience. If so, then we are repeating their cycle, inheriting their lesson. The breath of the old world may be what they tried to preserve, not in words or stone, but in pattern. An understanding that every civilization is built on borrowed climate, borrowed balance, borrowed time. As the new ground emerges, explorers and scientists will find clues to how those earlier cycles unfolded. Fossilized forests, buried deltas, and sedimentary layers will reveal the sequence of past warmings, the pace of recovery, the limits of stability. They will tell us whether the planet has done this before and how it healed. But they will also show us how fragile that healing is. The last time the Earth was as warm as it's projected to become, sea levels were meters higher and coastlines were unrecognizable. The maps of the world will change again. The continents themselves will breathe differently, redistributing water, energy, and life. There's a strange humility in imagining that. To think of cities dissolving into ocean floors, of new forests growing where tundra once stretched endlessly. It reminds us that we're not outside of the Earth's story, but inside it, subject to its rhythms. The breath of the old world is not separate from ours. Every inhalation we take contains molecules that have travelled through countless lungs, animal, plant, microbial, human. When we breathe, we participate in the same continuity that connects glacier air to rainforest mist, volcano smoke to cloud vapour. The planet's respiration moves through us. Somewhere, in the deep cold where ice still grips the land, ancient air remains trapped in bubbles. Those bubbles are time capsules, tiny pockets of atmosphere that formed thousands of years ago. When scientists extract them from ice cores and release their contents, they are literally breathing the past. The air inside is thin, dry, and slightly sweet, with higher purity than modern air. It is the breath of mammoths and megafauna, of forests that grew under different constellations. The realization is both intimate and immense. Every bubble is a direct message from another epoch, preserved through silence, released through curiosity. If the ice conceals remnants of earlier intelligence, the traces of builders or scientists who lived before the known age of humanity, then their discovery would be the ultimate encounter with the breath of the old world. Their materials, whatever form they took, would have adapted to geological time. We might find alloys that don't corrode, patterns etched into rock by unknown methods, or alignments too precise to dismiss as coincidence. These would not be relics of myth, but messages in matter. They might not even need translation. Like DNA or mathematics, they would speak through form, through order, through the universal language of structure. Whether or not we ever find such evidence, the act of searching is its own revelation. It proves that we too are part of the same lineage of curiosity that might have existed before. We look at the world and ask the same questions. How did it begin? How will it end? What lies beyond what we can see? Those questions are themselves fossils of thought, preserved in every generation, awakening each time the world changes. There's an idea in philosophy that the universe is recursive, that it continually recreates itself, repeating patterns across scales and ages. The breath of the old world embodies that idea. Each cycle of ice and thaw, each rise and fall of civilization, is a repetition of something fundamental. Life expands until it exceeds its balance, collapses, then begins again, wiser but never permanent. It's not punishment or tragedy, it's rhythm. The same rhythm that governs the tides, the heartbeat, the seasons. The same rhythm that keeps atoms spinning and stars burning. When the last remnants of the glaciers finally melt, what will remain is not ruin, but renewal. The exposed landscapes will host new life, just as they did after every previous thaw. Grass will colonize the soil first, then shrubs, then forests. Rivers will braid themselves across plains, creating new habitats. Animals will migrate, adapt, evolve. Human beings, if we endure, will learn to live differently, perhaps closer to the patterns of the earth than before. The breath of the old world will become the breath of the new. There is something profoundly humbling in realizing that the same molecules now leaving the ice will one day circulate through future beings, through trees, through oceans, through lungs not yet born. We are inhaling the memory of ancient worlds and exhaling the beginnings of others. The continuity of breath links everything that ever lived. Even as the ice vanishes, that continuity remains unbroken. The old world does not speak in language, but in presence. Its message is not carved or recorded, but experienced. It tells us that endurance comes not from resisting change, but from flowing with it. The glaciers carved valleys by yielding to gravity, not by opposing it. The rivers shaped continents by movement, not by stillness. The earth survives because it never stops transforming. In that transformation lies its grace. Perhaps that is the final wisdom the old world offers us as it exhales into ours, that to remember is not to hold, but to let go. The ice, after all, does not cling to its water. It releases it, knowing that it will rise as vapour, travel as cloud, and fall again as snow. Memory too must move through such cycles. The knowledge of the ancients, the stories of the forgotten builders, the lessons of past climates. They will all dissolve and reappear in new forms, in new minds. That is how continuity works. That is how the universe keeps breathing. And so, as the air warms and the last great ice sheets diminish, the world takes a long, deep breath. The sound of melting, the shimmer of mist, the pulse of rivers, all of it becomes part of one vast inhalation. What was frozen becomes fluid. What was silent begins to speak. The breath of the old world flows through us now, asking only that we listen, remember, and continue. It reminds us that we are temporary, but not separate. that we're made of the same elements that once slept beneath the glaciers, the same dust that built mountains and stars. And as we stand in the warmth of the changing world, feeling that ancient air on our skin, we understand that the planet is not dying, it is breathing. And in its breath, we find our place, brief but real, in the endless memory of Earth.